best funded part. Scotland is the best funded part of Great Britain, and there is a union dividend. There is a union dividend there of £2,000 per man, woman, and child.
We now come to Shadow Secretary of State Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State, or should I say Lord Jack-elect, was blindingly loyal to the former Prime Minister, former Chancellor, the former Prime Minister and former Chancellor over the summer, who created the British economy, who crashed the British economy on the back of handing out tax cuts to the richest. It's an economic crisis created around the Cabinet table in Downing Street by the people he sits beside, and it will be paid for by working Scots. So can I ask, what prices do you think Scottish public services and Scottish working people should pay for his government crashing the economy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I would say, as I said in previous answers, we are facing a global economic downturn, and that is a result of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. Addressing his final point, the Prime Minister made it very clear that he wants to protect the most vulnerable in society. However, I do acknowledge, and he did refer to my previous roles in Cabinet, I do acknowledge that mistakes were made, and the Chancellor took immediate steps to restore market stability when he came into his new role. And I'm sure the honourable gentleman will agree one other thing with me, which is, along with leading economists, we can all agree that the biggest risk to the economy of Scotland is the reckless, I was just waiting for the temperature to rise, is the reckless plans of the Scottish Government.
Ian Murray.
Mr. Speaker, it's the reckless plans of both governments that are a danger to Scotland. But the thing is, and this is what the Secretary of State denies, it's not just about the last 12 weeks, but the decisions of the last 12 years. A few weeks ago, a constituent came to my surgery in tears. Their 1.79% 5-year fixed-rate mortgage was expiring, and the remortgage rate was nearly 6%. This familiar story means going from a stable income and affordable bills to the crushing anxiety of being unable to pay for the roof over the heads of their family. This was totally avoidable, but this Government and Secretary of State chose to ignore the experts, ignore their own officials and ignore independent bodies like the Office for Budget Responsibility. The result, a Tory premium on everyone's mortgages. So does the Secretary of State think that he and his new Prime Minister should stop refusing to say sorry and give the public an apology at the very least that they deserve?
Seriously.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I do understand how concerned people are about their mortgages, and there are obviously a number of factors are influencing interest rates. But all I would say to him is that we're doing all we can to limit those factors and to support the people who need it most at this difficult time.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Murray Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's very concerning to hear the Minister dispute the figures from the House of Commons Library. So let me just emphasise that Scotland's block grant is being cut. Our services are being eroded by Tory cuts, the economy is being undermined by Brexit, and as part of the UK, Scotland is facing the deepest recession in Europe. And this Government's response is more austerity, despite Scotland rejecting that premise for over 50 years. So will the Minister and the rest of his disaster capitalist Tories get out of Scotland's way and stop denying democracy and allow Scotland to choose its own path out of this nightmare?
Secretary of State.
Well, as the honourable lady knows, the party that's denying democracy is the one that doesn't accept the result of the referendum in 2014.
Murray Black.
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't be here if we didn't accept the outcome. But anyway, and I don't need any lectures on democracy from a soon-to-be unelected Baron. No matter how much this Government denies it, Scotland's budget is being cut. So does this Minister think, if we put independence to the side for a moment, does this Minister think that it is the Tories that are causing Scotland's demise and shortchanging us, or is it this union institutionally?
Secretary of State.
The union, as I've said before, Mr. Speaker, the union brings a union dividend of £2,000 per man, woman and child to Scotland. It deals with a deficit last year under the Scottish Government's own figures of £23 billion. It is a union that delivers jobs. It's delivering 4,000 jobs, as we announced yesterday, on the Clyde to build 5 Type 26 frigates. This is a union that serves the whole United Kingdom well. At different times, different parts of the United Kingdom pull their weight in different ways, but we are all much stronger together.
Chris Stevens.
You're enjoying yourself, aren't you?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 2 and 7 together. Without preempting the details of the Chancellor's statement tomorrow, this Government's position is that whilst tough decisions will be necessary, we remain committed to targeting support to the most vulnerable people in our communities across this land. As well as a record block grant settlement to the Scottish Government, the people of Scotland benefit from higher levels of public spending, as demonstrated through the union dividend of around £2,000 a year per person.
Chris Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, the number of food bank parcels handed out by the Trussell Trust has doubled since 2015, which is a direct consequence of austerity. So can the Minister give an assurance to the House that there will be no more return to austerity so we can tackle the root causes of food poverty and the cost of living?
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, as the Member of Parliament for Govan, I hope the honourable member will join me, first of all, in welcoming the £4.2 billion defence investment into Glasgow's shipyards to build 5 new Type 26 frigates, which will support hundreds of local jobs in his constituency. Now, the UK Government will always act to help the most vulnerable people in our society. Now, the Government is helping to protect households from significant energy bill rises through the Energy Price Guarantee, holding down inflation, and this is on top of the targeted support for the most vulnerable, including £1,200 in direct payments this year. In terms of further measures, I would encourage the honourable member to wait for the Chancellor's statement tomorrow.
Angela Crawley.
Speaker, last week I hosted a cost of living event in Hamilton, and every day I am inundated by people contacting me about the potential loss of the triple lock-on pensions. My constituents across Lanark and Hamilton East were just getting by before the cost of living crisis and are now avoiding supermarkets, struggling to pay heating bills and fearing starvation and hypothermia this coming winter. Will the Minister act now to prevent pension poverty and call on the Chancellor today to guarantee a triple lock on pensions and to ensure that these rise in line with inflation?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier, the focus of this Government is supporting the most vulnerable people in our society and will always take this responsibility seriously. The Government will act, as it always does, to take the action necessary to support the constituents that she has mentioned. Now, the honourable member mentions the potential effect of government spending decisions. I will gladly tell the honourable lady about the very real effect that the SNP's spending decisions are having in Scotland. They've wasted hundreds of millions of pounds on ferries that don't float. A fortune has been wasted on malicious prosecutions at Rangers Football Club. Their mistakes have cost hundreds of millions of pounds to fix Edinburgh sick kids and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Glasgow. And worst of all, Mr. Speaker, they've spent millions of pounds pushing for another independent referendum which does not match with the priorities of the people of Scotland.
Richard Thompson.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 4 and 5 together. There are no current plans to do so. However, trust is important, and I hope members opposite share my concerns at the use of inaccurate or misleading statistics covering energy and health by the SNP government in Edinburgh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This year's Scottish Social Attitudes Survey has revealed that 66% of people trust the Scottish Government to work in Scotland's interests just about always or most of the time, which compares with only 22% who trust the UK Government to behave in the same way, and 46% who consider that they can never trust the UK Government to work in Scotland's best interests. That's a quite remarkable set of findings. Does the Minister have any useful insights into why the people of Scotland might feel this way?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been clear about the need to rebuild trust and to put the public above politics. We will act with integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level of government. Now, the honourable member refers to the Social Attitude Survey. I would suggest the figures from the survey which should cause the SNP most concern are the falling levels of satisfaction with the SNP's run NHS in Scotland. Two-thirds of Scots, 66%, believe the standard of the NHS has fallen in the past 12 months. The priority of the SNP should be the NHS, not another independence referendum.
Erdo says a bit of paper in front of him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. Mr. Speaker, allowing former Prime Ministers to fill the Lords with their friends, funneling public funds to cronies during a pandemic, crashing the economy and debasing and embarrassing this Parliament by allowing a sitting member to appear in a reality TV programme, is it any wonder that people in Scotland don't trust the Conservative government? Does the Minister think trust in the government is low because of this, or is it the distrust in the Westminster system itself?
I'm not sure it's relevant.
Mr. Speaker, I struggle to hear parts of that question, but the people of Scotland can always trust this United Kingdom government to be upfront and honest about the challenges that we face. Unlike the SNP government in Edinburgh, who refused to come clean about the huge economic impact of their plans to divide Scotland with another referendum.
Select Committee, Pete Wishart.
Speaker, can I say to the honourable gentleman, this government will never regain the trust of the Scottish people as long as they don't respect the democracy of their Parliament. But the Secretary of State might have his boat hole to the House of Lords, but he and all his other Scottish colleagues will have to face the wrath of the electorate. So what representations has the soon-to-be Baron Jack made on behalf of him and his colleagues to make sure that they're safely ensconced in the House of Lords?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I struggle to hear the end of the honourable member's question, but we remain committed to Scotland remaining at the heart of the United Kingdom. We respect the referendum results from 2014, and I would encourage the honourable member from North Perthshire and his colleagues to do the same.
Shadow Minister Liz Truss.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister was anointed, he stood in Downing Street and said he would put integrity at the heart of his government. That was just 3 short weeks ago. Now, since then, one of his key ministers has had to resign for threatening to slit someone's throat. His Home Secretary is clinging on to her job, the one she resigned from a week before being reappointed. His predecessor has appointed his old mates and cronies to the House of Lords, and the old but newly appointed Deputy Prime Minister has been outed as a bully. Does the Minister think that speaks to integrity at the heart of government?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been crystal clear about the need to put integrity at the heart of his government. One thing is also certain, that the people of Scotland can trust this United Kingdom government to deliver for Scotland, whether that be the delivery of the COVID-19 vaccines or the record £41 billion budget for the Scottish Government. This is what really matters, I would suggest, to my constituents in the Scottish borders and people across Scotland.
Lynn Saxby.
6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Government recognises the important role that infrastructure plays in supporting the commercialisation of floating offshore wind at scale across the United Kingdom, including the Celtic Sea, and is committed to building capacity in infrastructure and supply chain to support the growing offshore wind industry.
Good. Move along. Lynn Saxby.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend will no doubt be aware of the Kincardine Flow Farm off the coast of Aberdeen. He may not be aware that the fabrication of these turbines took place in Rotterdam because UK ports do not have the capacity to do this work. Does my honourable friend agree with me that to realise the potential of this industry, port infrastructure investment is crucial, and that the lion's share of this investment should be in the Celtic Sea?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I commend my honourable friend for raising this important issue, which is an important part of the Scottish economy. Scotland is a world leader in floating offshore winds. It is the home to both the world's first and the world's largest commercial floating wind projects, High Wind Scotland and Kincardine. The ScotWind leasing round announced earlier this year includes nearly 18 gigawatts of potential floating wind capacity, underlying the scale of the opportunity.
Speaker, what discussions has the Secretary of State had with his colleagues and Scottish Government counterparts about the number of jobs created in Scotland by greater investment in offshore wind?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We continue to engage with our colleagues in the Scottish Government in this policy area and in a number of other areas. I'd be very happy to meet the Honourable Lady to discuss further opportunities that we might be able to create in the future.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The UK Government's energy price guarantee will reduce the unit cost of electricity and gas that's for the typical household across Great Britain, including in Scotland, and will save around £700 this winter, including reducing bills by roughly 1/3.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Speaker, it's really important when people are facing energy price increases that they have confidence that the bills they are getting from their provider are correct. I have one constituent who, after intervention from my office, we have sorted her bill, but she's now had another invoice. This seems to be a growing trend as I'm now dealing with 7 cases. What discussions can the Scotland Office have with Ofgem in relation to this? Because it's critical with rising prices and a higher cost for energy in Scotland that we address this issue.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very concerned to hear about the case that the Honourable Lady has raised. Obviously, Ofgem is independent of government, but if she's able to send me the details of that case, I'd be happy to raise it with Ofgem directly.
Alexander Stafford.
Mr Speaker, I have regular discussions with the Ministry of Defence on matters relating to defence in Scotland. This includes the crucial role our armed forces' presence is at our strategic bases in Scotland, RAF Lossiemouth and His Majesty's Naval Base Clyde, which are vital to maintaining the security of the United Kingdom and our NATO allies. The defence industry is also vital to Scotland's economy, and I'm delighted to see that the new Type 26 frigates costing £4.2 billion will be built by BAE Systems on the Clyde in Govan, and this will secure thousands of Scottish jobs for years to come.
Alexander Stafford.
Speaker, the British Armed Forces are the pride of our nation and represent every single corner of our beloved United Kingdom. I am proud that our nuclear deterrent is based at Fars Lane, with our brave submariners working to keep Britain safe. It is highly regrettable, though, that some would strip us of our nuclear deterrent in Scotland. In an ever more dangerous world, and facing threats of Russia and China, what assurances can my right honourable friend give me that our base at the Clyde and all other military bases in Scotland are not going anywhere?
Mr Speaker, I agree with my honourable friend. Our nuclear deterrent plays a key role in protecting every United Kingdom citizen from the most extreme threats, and I completely agree with him that to abandon it would put us all at greater risk.
Before we come to Deputy Prime Minister's questions, I'd like to point out the British Sign Language interpretation proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We start with questions to the Deputy Prime Minister. Clive Betts.
Mr Speaker.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I've been asked to respond on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who is currently attending the G20 Leaders Summit in Bali. I may also say, Mr Speaker, after the missile strike in Poland yesterday, that we reaffirm our solidarity with Poland, we express our condolences with the victims, and we're working with our allies to determine precisely what happened, and the Foreign Secretary will be making a statement shortly.
I bet.
Mr Speaker, could I begin by associating myself with the comments of the Deputy Prime Minister? I'm sure the whole House will want to reaffirm our complete support for Ukraine and for Poland in the face of Russian aggression. When he had got the job in his first day, the Prime Minister promised, and I quote, integrity, professionalism and accountability.
Where is it?
I assume the Deputy Prime Minister agrees with that promise and would expect all ministers to follow such principles. Therefore, does the Deputy Prime Minister also agree that in line with his promise, the Prime Minister should ensure that no minister who has a complaint of bullying upheld against them should continue to serve in his government?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman and thank him for his shared solidarity on the issue in Poland. He's right to quote what the Prime Minister said, and I take it as an article of personal faith that we behave with absolute integrity and accountability. I am confident that I have behaved professionally throughout, but immediately I heard that 2 complaints had been made. I believe they were made yesterday. I was notified this morning. I immediately asked the Prime Minister to set up an independent investigation, and of course I will comply with it fully.
Richards.
Last week, many of my constituents are celebrating Gurpurab of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, who travelled the world with an important message about equality and seva, selfless service. It's something we see running through many of the actions carried out by Sikhs and others in my constituency of West Bromwich East through organisations like Midlands Langar Seva Society and Guru Har Rai Gurdwara. Would my right honourable friend join me in thanking the community for their ongoing seva and extend his best wishes for Gurpurab?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend at this important time of year for the Sikh community and the Sikh faith? I join with her in what she said. They make the Sikh community make an outstanding contribution in her constituency with the Midland Langar Seva Society and the Guru Har Rai Gurdwara in her constituency, but they also make an amazing contribution to the whole country, and we're grateful for it.
General Deputy Leader Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I share the Deputy Prime Minister's remarks regarding the Sikh community and, most importantly, about the incident in Poland last night? I know the whole House stands united in our support for the Ukrainian people and sends condolences for the tragic loss of life. And Britain has an unshakable commitment to NATO and our allies, including Poland. The government has rightly requested we establish the facts and avoid unhelpful speculation, so I understand that the Deputy Prime Minister might not be able to go further today. But does he agree that last night's events aside, the fact that Russia is launching missile attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure whilst world leaders meet shows the utter contempt that Putin has for international order?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady? I entirely agree with what she said. President Putin started this war, and whatever the determination made in relation to the events yesterday, they result, whether directly or indirectly, from the unlawful aggression perpetrated by the Russian government, and that's why the Prime Minister is out at the G20 rallying support, making sure we wean ourselves off energy dependence on Russia, making sure we make sure we've got the energy supply from other parts of the world, and I agree with what she said 100%.
Angela Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's right that we condemn Putin in his strongest terms. But the G20 is also an opportunity to work together to tackle the economic challenges we all face. Yet as our international allies race to crack down on multinationals using tax havens to stash profits abroad, this government is dragging its feet to protect their profits. We have a budget tomorrow, Mr. Speaker, where it's briefed that tough choices will be impacting on families across Britain. Does he accept that every pound hidden in tax havens is a pound lost from the pockets of working families?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady? I mean, look, we want people to come to this country to create the jobs and to generate the tax revenue. Whether it's non-dom status, which was stricter under this government given the changes we made than under the last Labour government, whether it's the Prime Minister's approach to big tech companies, where he's led the charge with the G presidency in making sure there's an international approach and delivering global minimum corporate tax rules. We have lowered the tax gap, the difference between the tax owed and the tax raised, to the lowest level, certainly lower than under the last Labour government, and will continue to do so.
Angela Rayner.
I notice non-dom status hasn't been abolished, though, Mr. Speaker, and the Conservatives would have us all believe that the economic problems are out of their hands, when the truth is, Mr. Speaker, it's working people paying the price for their choices. They've chosen to protect corporate profits and not household incomes. There are 38 countries in the OECD two-year growth league table. Where does the UK rank in that table?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank her. She'll know that on the latest data, unemployment remains at a 50-year low. Well, she's saying the Shadows Chancellor is saying it's gone up. It's half the level left by the last Labour government. And when it comes to GDP, and when it comes to GDP, she'll know that the IMF has said that we will have the strongest growth in the G7.
Angela
Mr. Speaker, I think the economic situation families face speaks for itself. But I'll answer the question for the Deputy Prime Minister. The answer is 38 out of 38 on growth. If there was a World Cup for growth, we wouldn't even qualify. Working people are paying the price for 12 years of Tory failure. The wrong choices by the wrong people. Now, after days of dodging and denial, this morning, the Deputy Prime Minister finally acknowledged formal complaints about his misconduct. But his letter contains no hint of admission or apology. This is anti-bullying. This is anti-bullying week. Will he apologise?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Lady? Look, in terms of the economic challenges which are global, caused by COVID and the war in Ukraine, we've got a plan to grip inflation, balance the books and drive economic growth. If we listen to the Honourable Lady, debt would go up, unemployment would go up and working Britons would pay the price. She asked about the complaints. I received notification this morning. I immediately asked the Prime Minister to set up an independent inquiry into them. I'm confident I behaved professionally throughout, but of course I will engage thoroughly and look forward, Mr. Speaker, may I say, look forward to transparently addressing any claims that have been made.
So, Mr. Speaker, let me get this straight. He has had to demand an investigation into himself because the Prime Minister is too weak to get a grip. A Prime Minister in office less than a month, with a disgraced Cabinet Minister resigned with his good wishes, the Home Secretary who breached the ministerial code and risked national security still clings on, and now the Prime Minister defends his deputy whose behaviour has been described as abrasive, controlling and demeaning. With junior staff, Mr. Speaker, too scared to even enter his office. And that's without mentioning the flying tomatoes. The Deputy Prime Minister knows his behaviour is unacceptable. So what's he still doing here?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm here and happy to address any specific point she wishes to make. Well, that never happened, she says from a sedentary position, and I will thoroughly rebut and refute any of the claims that have been made. She hasn't, in fact, put a specific point to me. If she wishes to do so, and this is her opportunity, I'd be very glad to address it.
Angela Rayner.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe he just doesn't think there's a problem, or maybe he's suggesting that civil servants are liars. Now he's reportedly banned from meeting junior staff without supervision. While we await an inquiry the Prime Minister hasn't even instigated from a watchdog he hasn't even appointed. In the Prime Minister's letter, he did not say how and when this will be investigated or by who. No ethics, no integrity and no mandate, and still no ethics advisor. So when will they appoint an independent ethics advisor and drain the swamp?
Mr. Speaker, the recruitment of the new ethics advisor is already underway and taking place at pace. But may I say, Mr. Speaker, there's a reason that she's come to the dispatch box with her usual mix of bluster and mudslinging. It's because they don't have a plan. Mr. Speaker, we're helping people into work. She's in hot to the unions. We're protecting our borders. She voted against every single measure to control illegal immigration for this country. We're delivering cleaner growth and energy security. She wants to send billions in reparation payments abroad. The British people want a government that can deal with the real challenges, and they're not up to it.
Lucy Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hope House Children's Hospice provides dedicated end-of-life care to children from Telford and across Shropshire. This Sunday, Hope House is holding an online fundraiser called the Big Night In, and they aim to beat last year's target of £500,000. Among the fabulous prizes are premium tickets to the Telford Steam Railway Polar Express. will enjoy a Christmas adventure to the North Pole, complete with hot chocolate, cookies, golden tickets, and the first gift of Christmas from Santa, which is the reindeer's silver bell. Please will the Deputy Prime Minister log on to Hope House Children's Hospice Big Night In this Sunday, and if he's lucky enough to win a pair of tickets to the Telford Polar Express, I should be delighted to go to the North Pole with him.
So I thank you to go there, be careful.
Can I thank my honourable friend and congratulate her and Hope House Children's Hospice for the amazing work they do. I've been working very closely with Shooting Star Child Hospices, which is a similar organisation in my constituency. If she ever gets bored of the trains, I jumped out of an aeroplane at 15,000 feet to raise money for Shooting Star. She'd find it a thoroughly enjoyable experience.
Deputy Leader of the SNP, Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself and my colleagues with the remarks made about the immense contribution of our Sikh communities? Mr. Speaker, the SNP extend our full support and condolences this morning to Poland following the death of two civilians last night. And while a full investigation is ongoing, we reiterate our calls for Russia to end its brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister was asked 6 different times to apologise for the disaster of the Tory mini-budget and the financial crisis it caused. And all 6 times he refused to say sorry. And now, this morning, people are waking up to the news that this Christmas they will be hit with the worst inflation in 41 years. So will the Deputy Prime Minister stand up today and do what his boss wouldn't? Will he say sorry?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable lady for what she said both about Poland but also about the importance of our solidarity with the international community against the appalling illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Look, in terms of inflation, clearly that is a problem. I think as Chancellor and now as Prime Minister, and for months, it has been this Prime Minister who has been making clear that it is the #1 economic challenge we face. We've got a plan to grip inflation, to balance the books, to drive economic growth, and my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will be making a statement tomorrow, the autumn statement, which will set out our plan to take the Scottish people and everyone across the United Kingdom through these challenges.
Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if they can't even say sorry for the mess that they've made, what hope do we have of them fixing it? Because let's be clear, tomorrow's budget is imposing austerity 2.0 on all of our constituents. That is the political choice that the Tories are making.
Exactly.
But there are always different and better choices. Only this week, the Scottish Child's Payment rose to £25 a week. That's a 150% increase in 8 months, and it will help 400,000 children. So if the Tories won't say sorry for the mess that they have made, will they at least make the right choice for once? Will his government join the fight against child poverty tomorrow, follow the lead of the Scottish Government and match the Scottish Child Payment?
Deputy Prime Minister.
The honourable lady will know that we are facing challenges that are faced all around the world because of COVID, because of the war in Ukraine. We've seen rising inflation in Germany, in the Eurozone, in the US, but the reality is this Prime Minister and this Chancellor have a plan. We're going to have more detail set out in the autumn statement, but of course the UK Government will continue to work with the Scottish Government collaboratively to safeguard and protect the most most vulnerable right across the United Kingdom, and I think that's what the Scottish people expect.
Belper Mills in my mid-Derbyshire constituency are in a state of disrepair. The community is hugely worried about their future. It matters not just for my constituents but for the whole country because the mills are part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site in the UK. If appropriate redevelopment is not agreed soon, the site risks losing its World Heritage Site status. Will my right honourable friend confirm that the government will pay close attention to this case in order to ensure that we do not lose our World Heritage status And will he come with me to visit the mill and discuss potential solutions with local people?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for her campaigning on this? And yes, of course, we will continue to monitor the condition of Belper Mills and the planning applications. I think the best I can say is we strongly encourage all the local bodies, whether it's the council, the applicant, to continue to work together because, above all, her constituents will want to continue to celebrate the proud and rich tradition represented by Belper.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
The Prime Minister will join me in welcoming the comments yesterday by the Foreign Secretary to the European Scrutiny Committee that securing Northern Ireland's place within the Union will be the priority of the Government in the negotiations with the European Union on the Northern Ireland Protocol. One of the benefits of that union is the support that the Government of the United Kingdom is providing to households and businesses across the entire country to tackle the cost of living crisis. Will the Deputy Prime Minister assure me that the £400 energy support payment that is due to be made to households in Northern Ireland will be announced as soon as possible?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah, I thank the honourable gentleman. Absolutely what he said about securing Northern Ireland within the constitutional economic integrity of the UK is absolutely vital. The Prime Minister has been very clear upon that, as well as the Foreign Secretary. And of course, the Chancellor will be saying more on the economic measures and the particular fiscal measures he referred to tomorrow.
Sir Edmund Lee.
Even if an illegal migrant is stopped on a French beach, as no one is ever arrested, he will simply come back the next day. Will the Deputy Prime Minister ensure that we remove all pull factors for illegal migration by using his new Bill of Rights to ensure that we have the legal power to arrest and deport and detain illegal migrants, and, for instance, have a review about a national identity card so that people just don't vanish and they never ever get deported?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? I totally agree with him that we need to strain every sinew to stop this appalling trade in misery. There's no silver bullet. I think the agreement that the Home Secretary made with her French opposite number will help. We're embedding UK officials with their French counterparts for the first time. He's right that the Bill of Rights can help as well, not least in preventing interim orders from the Strasbourg Court from being recognised in the UK courts. On ID cards, we already have e-visas for people coming to visit and live in the UK, and they act as digital evidence of someone else's immigration status. The one thing that's clear, though, and I say to my honourable friend, we'll have to do all of these things in the teeth of the opposition from the front bench opposite.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our small rural schools in Wyre face particular difficulties. The head teacher at Scorton and Calder Vale primary schools told me that budgets in schools like ours are stretched, as we have to pay for a lot of additional services that larger urban schools can provide in-house. She has to hire the village hall for PE lessons because the schools have no hall. She has to hire taxis to bring in the school meals because the schools have got no kitchens. So given the school budget cuts, what would the Deputy Prime Minister advise my head teacher cuts from our local children?
Minister. Can I say to the honourable lady, we are very sympathetic to the challenges that all of our schools face. More will be said about the specific measures tomorrow, but she should stand assured that we are the top spenders as a percentage of GDP in the G7 on primary and secondary education, and standards, which matter to pupils and parents most, have increased, with schools rated good or outstanding up from 68% in 2010 to 87% today.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Prime Minister will be aware of the opportunities but also the challenges facing Torbay's tourism and hospitality sector, including increased energy costs and the impact of business rates. What consideration is he giving to the situation of Torbay's iconic industry and further measures to support it?
Can I thank honourable friend? He's a fantastic champion for Torbay. Now, of course, the Chancellor will make a statement tomorrow. I can't speculate on the spending decisions, but he will have already noticed the tourism recovery plan, which will help recovering from the pandemic, but also as part of the wider levelling up agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Private rents in my constituency are completely out of control, and since the government broke the economy and broke the mortgage market, the hope of owning a home is quickly receding, with the cost of living skyrocketing, Tory tax rises through the roof, and an extra 1 million people in the private rented sector since 2010. Will the government get a grip and tackle housing in my constituency and across the country?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the honourable lady? As a former housing minister, I know how important these issues are, and I can also tell the honourable lady that the Housing Secretary is looking at the situation of renters and landlords very carefully, and legislation is coming forward shortly.
Thank you, Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Mikey Akers, who has verbal dyspraxia, said the following a few weeks ago: "I'm not ashamed of my disability, but I am ashamed of the people who judge me without knowledge or understanding." 5% of all children are impacted by speech and communication needs, according to the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists and the Dyspraxia Foundation, and more needs to be done to raise awareness in society. Will my right honourable friend agree to convene a meeting with the Prime Minister to raise awareness about verbal dyspraxia, so inspirational people like Mikey are never again left without a voice?
The Prime Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his doughty championing and highlighting of Mikey's campaigning. All children and young people should receive the support they need to make the very best of all their talents and potential. We published, he will know, a green paper in March covering a whole range of these issues, and I will certainly make sure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Deputy Prime Minister tell this House if he has ever entered into a non-disclosure agreement connected to a complaint against him?
Deputy Prime Minister.
He's referring to an employment dispute that was settled before I entered the House. It wasn't an NDA, but it did involve a confidentiality clause, which was standard at the time.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And all our constituents want to see an end to the dangerous and illegal crossings of the Channel. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that services are delivered in the first safe place that refugees flee to. And in that context, the Deputy Prime Minister, as a former Foreign Secretary and Development Minister, would he commit to backing the work of Education Cannot Wait, which delivers education in those refugee camps?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? She's absolutely right about the brilliant work they do. She will know how important the campaign for girls' education was, both the last Prime Minister but also this Prime Minister, and we will certainly look at what more we can do to support the brilliant work, particularly for children growing up in camps like that.
Dr. Rupert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Deputy PM's comeback, which I congratulate him on, and the new direction of tomorrow signal that the ban on no-fault evictions from the last manifesto is all back on after zilch from the last PM? And if so, can he, by emergency powers if necessary, get it on the statute book so no family, on a whim, gets left out in the cold this winter?
I know my right honourable friend, the Housing Secretary, is looking at all of these matters. He will have heard what she said, and I won't prejudice what further measures he's going to come forward with, but I will ask him to write to you to address the specific proposals you're making.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if my right honourable and learned friend has noticed that the people who are currently criticising him, no thank you, who are currently criticising him have a record of bullying second to none. A Labour Member of Parliament left Parliament because of anti-Semitic bullying. Yeah. A distinguished BBC journalist needed bodyguards at Labour Party conferences. And a current member of the Labour Party opposite, a right honourable member, was suspended from the service of this House for bullying. Does he think, as I do, that this is at the very least hypercritical, and maybe a stronger word that is not necessarily parliamentary?
My right honourable friend makes his point in his usual inimitable way. All I will say is I think it's important that we all take responsibility for our actions, and that's precisely what I've done today.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A 1958 instruction from Whitehall ordered medics to take blood samples regularly from exposed veterans during nuclear weapons tests. However, I've been made aware that many veterans and their families have reported being unable to obtain these test results, and so denied the ability to make any sense of what they, and in some cases their families, suffered. So can the Secretary investigate and inform me of the legal rights of these men in obtaining their medical records? And will he undertake to ask the Prime Minister to order these medical files be opened to veterans and the UK Health Security Agency immediately?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? She's been a consistent champion on this issue, and I recognise and pay tribute to her for that. My understanding is that the information is available to veterans and their families who may request details of their service and medical records, but if she would like to write to me, I will make sure on the more specific points she made, she gets an adequate answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise not to perpetuate partisanship nor parrot party lines, but merely to amplify the sentiments of the honourable lady for Salford and Eccles. The brave servicemen who did so much so long ago to ensure our safety, the nuclear test veterans, were recognised by former Prime Minister David Cameron, and in a meeting with the honourable lady and I, by the former Prime Minister, the member for Uxbridge. Will this Deputy Prime Minister and our new Prime Minister recognise them too, not only by doing what the Honourable Lady has asked for, but by giving them the service medal they so richly deserve, and we owe them?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and we should forever be grateful to all those service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme. I can tell him and I can reassure him we have asked officials to look again at recognition with medals, and any recommendations will be announced in the usual way.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 7 years ago, in my first PMQs, a Conservative Prime Minister told me to stop griping and get behind his rail investment plans. A few weeks ago, the new Business Secretary said there really wasn't much point in going ahead with Northern Powerhouse Rail. Time and time again, Mr. Speaker, Tory Prime Ministers have promised NPR only to break their promises. So will the Deputy Prime Minister now put on record whether he supports Transport for the North's preferred option for NPR with the stop in Bradford?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I can tell the honourable lady that our £96 billion integrated rail plan will make the Northern Powerhouse Rail a reality. We're committed. We're committed to the project. The precise details will be set out in due course.
Peter Byrne.
If migrants who crossed the Channel from France illegally were immediately returned to France, it would stop illegal migration in this country. It would break the economic model of the people smugglers. And perhaps more importantly, it would stop thousands and thousands of people descending to northern French cities, which would be to the benefit of the French. So, Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister spoke to the French President, was a returns policy discussed? And if so, what was the President's response?
Can I thank my honourable friend? He's absolutely right to raise this issue. I can't tell him the precise readout from the meeting. I haven't seen it yet. What I can tell him is, of course, the Home Secretary's deal, an agreement with her French opposite number, means a 40% increase in officers patrolling beaches in northern France. For the first time ever, UK officers will be embedded with their French counterparts. There'll be investment in port security infrastructure, more technology and more wider European cooperation. We have taken all of these measures and all in the teeth of the opposition of the front bench opposite. They've opposed every single measure that we've taken to stop illegal immigration, including things where you'd think there was cross-party consensus, like life sentences for those traffickers that prey on human misery.
Mr. Speaker, it's not trade unions who have run public services to the ground, it's the Tories. It's not asylum seekers fleeing war and famine who are inflaming tensions, it's the Tories. And it's not those in low-paid jobs who are trashing the economy. Again, it's the Tories. So can the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House when this Tory government will finally accept responsibility for their economic, social and political mismanagement rather than blaming everyone else?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not a matter of blaming anyone, it's a matter of the team effort, the shared endeavour, working with the Scottish Government to make sure we get a grip on inflation, the #1 priority. And it's got to be said, if the Honourable Lady takes the position that we agree with inflation-busting pay rises, as difficult as these decisions are, we will only see inflation stay and prolong for longer. That will hurt the most vulnerable in our communities, whether it's in Scotland or across the rest of the UK.
Anderson.
We have a brilliant Home Secretary, but the Deputy Prime Minister will be aware of a wicked, ambitious bullying campaign led by the opposition to get us sacked over the past 4 weeks or so. So can the Deputy Prime Minister please reassure me and the people of Ashfield that the Home Secretary will be given all the tools that she needs to solve the migrant crisis and keep the bully boys out of number 10?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We fully support the Home Secretary and the important measures she's taking, whether it's the Rwanda scheme, whether it's implementing the Nationality and Borders Act, and whether it's the New Deal with France to make sure that we collaborate with our international partners on what is a shared issue. And the one thing that he can also rest assured is it will be opposed tooth and nail by the Labour Party opposite.
Charles Bourne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 1936, people from my constituency in Jarrow marched to Parliament demanding jobs. They were living in poverty and were hungry. 86 years later, and 39% of kids in Jarrow are still hungry. So will the Deputy Prime Minister and his government end this scandal and commit to providing free school meals to all 800,000 children, 40,000 of them in the North East, to households in receipt of universal credit?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? She'll know that we've extended the eligibility of free school meals to 1.9 million pupils. There's also, on top of that, the £200 million holiday activities and food programme, and then £1,200 of direct payments to the most vulnerable. But I would just gently say to her, we also need to keep an eye on the macroeconomic picture. The #1 priority is to get inflation down, and we won't be able to do that if we follow the plans of the benches opposite.
Esther McVeigh.
Mr. Speaker, given that we have the highest burden of taxation in living memory, it is clear that the government's financial difficulties are caused by overspending and not due to under-taxing. Does the Deputy Prime Minister therefore agree, if the government has got enough money to proceed with HS2 at any cost, then it has sufficient money not to increase taxes? If, however, it has so little money it has to increase taxes, which is a last thing for a Conservative government to do, then it doesn't have sufficient money for HS2. So can I gently urge the Deputy Prime Minister not to ask Conservative MPs to support any tax rises unless and until this unnecessary vanity project is scrapped? Because I, for one, won't support them.
Come on.
Can I thank my right honourable friend? I think I followed the various steps of logic in that question. I understand her opposition to HS2. I think we've got some very difficult decisions to make. They will inevitably involve a balanced approach. I will leave it to the Chancellor to set them out in the autumn statement tomorrow.
David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Caerphilly constituency, we have 5 food banks. One of those food banks is run by the Betrussell Trust, and they've issued over 2,000 food parcels during the last 6 months. And there's a question from the users of that food bank. It is, will the government give a firm commitment to ensuring that benefits will always be enough to purchase essentials?
The Prime Minister.
He raises a really important point, and we're doing everything we can to support those who may be reliant on food banks or otherwise struggling to make ends meet. He can see that, the Honourable Friend can see that with the £1,200 cost of living support that are going to the 8 million most vulnerable households, with the energy price guarantee and further measures for pensioners. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will set out further measures tomorrow. But of course, as I said before, the #1 priority is getting inflation down. We won't be able to do that if we follow the spending plans of the party opposite.
Final question, Salmon Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is also the Justice Secretary, and everybody in this House, irrespective of party, will know for the reputation of this House that standards are important. He has said that from the dispatch box this afternoon. Am I naive, however, in response to some of the points raised by members opposite? Am I naive to still believe in that good British tradition that one is innocent until proven guilty?
Well, he makes an important point, and of course, and I've said I will cooperate fully with the independent investigation. In fact, I welcome the opportunity to address these complaints. I think, though, it is important that we have zero tolerance for any bullying, and we hold the highest standards in public life, and it's important on all of us to adhere to those standards.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's questions. Right, let us start with the urgent question. Sir John, what are you doing? We start. Well, why didn't you go the other way? Give him a job on that front bench. Right, let us start with the urgent question. Yvette Cooper, Shadow Secretary.
Home Secretary to make a statement on migration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The continued rise of dangerous channel crossings is completely unacceptable. This phenomenon is not only a clear abuse of our immigration laws and deeply unfair on the British people, but it puts the lives of those who attempt these journeys in grave danger. This government is determined to put the people smugglers out of business and to make this route unviable. This week, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, met her counterpart, Minister Darmanin, to agree a new multi-year strategic and operational plan with France. This will be supported by UK investment of up to €72 million in 2022-23. It includes a 40% uplift in UK-funded officers patrolling the French coast over the coming months, improved security at ports, cutting-edge surveillance technology, drones, detection dog teams and CCTV to help detect and prevent these crossings. For the first time, reciprocal teams of embedded officers will be deployed on the ground in control rooms to increase the joint understanding of this issue. This renewed partnership will enable us to build on our joint partnership with France, which so far has seen good progress, with more than 30,000 illegal crossings prevented since the start of the year, hundreds of arrests made, and 21 organised crime gangs dismantled. Beyond our ever closer collaboration with France, we will also work closely with other international partners, including further upstream, to help address issues closer to their source. The UK will be joining near neighbours to countries to agree collective action to tackle illegal migration. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is today discussing these issues at the G7 Interiors Ministers meeting in Germany. These are issues of the utmost seriousness, and they've been discussed at Prime Ministerial level. We're taking action to deter those intent on exploiting the UK's generosity by implementing the Nationality and Borders Act, pursuing migration partnerships with safe countries like Rwanda, cracking down on those here illegally, and expediting returns agreements. Mr. Speaker, there should be no doubt whatsoever about the government's determination to grip this problem and deliver the strong and secure borders that the British people desperately want and deserve.
Shadow Home Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 27 lives were lost in the Channel a year ago, and a criminal gang was profited from sending the people to their deaths. Can you tell us whether anyone has been prosecuted or convicted for that awful event? We have long called for a stronger agreement with France to stop these dangerous boat crossings, and that's why it's important there is scrutiny on this. Additional beach patrols are welcome, and the intelligence sharing is clearly vital. It's unfathomable it wasn't happening already, but the level of convictions is pitiful. Just 4 a month on average. He said that 21 gangs had been dismantled. On Monday, the Home Secretary said it was 55. Which is it when journalists report 100 gang members operating in one small corner of Calais alone? The scale of response to these criminal gangs is tiny compared to the scale of the challenge, and the government is simply not doing enough. This is a multi-million-pound criminal industry that is putting lives at risk. So can he tell us, on the joint intelligence cell that he referred to, how many NCA officers are currently involved, how many are deployed in Europe, and what will it increase by? Because we need to know. This doesn't include anything on safe returns or safe family reunion. The number of children safely reuniting with family has plummeted since the end of the Dublin Agreement. Charities warned they're trying to go by boat instead, whilst asylum returns have plummeted from 1,000 people returned to the EU in 2010 to a tiny handful today, and of the 16,000 referred to the third country unit, just 21 referred. So, did ministers even try to get an agreement on returns and family reunion? If not, why not? What is his timescale for getting a grip on the total collapse in Home Office decisions on asylum? At what point will they double so we get a faster pace? And the consequence, the way the Home Office is handling local authorities has been disgraceful, with many of them not being told what is happening. And finally, can he tell us what is the 140 million on the Rwanda agreement actually been spent on? Too often, this Home Office talks about things but isn't delivering. It's too important.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased that the Right Honourable Lady welcomes our agreement with France. And she's right to raise the anniversary of the tragic and abhorrent deaths that occurred in the Channel 1 year ago. I'm pleased to say that a concerted effort with partners across Europe has led to arrests, has led to the disruption of gangs and to the capture and destruction of boats directly as a result of that. And the good working that our intelligence services did with respect to that incident is now being rolled out with respect to other criminal gangs right across Europe. The agreement that we've reached with France will enable our world-class intelligence services now to be directly in the room with their French counterparts, ensuring that the intelligence that they're gathering, which is very rich, and I've observed myself on visiting the clandestine command in Dover, is now able to be passed on in real time to their French counterparts, ensuring that more crossings are stopped, more arrests are made, and more criminal gangs are disrupted. And I think that will make a very positive impact in the months to come. But I would politely point out to the Right Honourable Lady that she is becoming like a broken record when it comes to immigration. She opposes everything helpful that we on this side have done, and she suggests nothing useful. She voted against the Nationality and Borders Act that created deterrence for people crossing the Channel. She voted against measures that would have increased sentences for people smugglers. She would scrap our world-leading migration partnership with Rwanda. She voted against our plans to remove dangerous foreign national offenders. And one of the key policy platforms upon which her leader, the leader of the opposition, stood for the leadership of the Labour Party, is to close down our immigration removal centres. The very centres where we house people like foreign national offenders, like murderers, like rapists, as we're trying to get them out of the country. The truth is that the party opposite is the party of uncontrolled migration. It's the party of mass migration. We understand the instincts of the British people, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and I will do everything to ensure that their will is implemented and we secure our borders.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister knows well the problems I have with surplus procurement of accommodation in my constituency of Workington, and I thank him for his engagement in recent days.
Can he confirm to me, given the woeful communication with MPs and local authorities in recent days and weeks, that lessons will be learned and that communication will be stepped up?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the productive and constructive conversations that we've had. It is absolutely essential that the Home Office and indeed partners like Serco treat local authorities and indeed members of Parliament with respect and engage with them productively. Since my arrival in the department, I've set in place protocols now so that all members of Parliament and local authorities will be notified in good time before hotel and other accommodation is procured, and that we move to a better procedure than that, whereby there is effective and constructive engagement in the days prior to taking the accommodation. It is worth saying, however, that these are the symptoms of the problem. The real core of the issue is the fact that 40,000 people have chosen to cross the Channel this year alone, and that places immense strain on our system. That is what we need to tackle. That is what we on this side of the House are committing to do, and that is what the opposition refuse to address.
A simple spokesperson, Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The £120 million totally wasted on the Rwanda plan could have quadrupled the number of caseworkers and cleared the backlog in asylum cases urgently. Can we have a department focused on the nuts and bolts of getting the job done instead of crazy, brutal and counterproductive headline-chasing policies? Because this, after all, is the root of all of our problems. This and the lack of safe and legal routes. I submitted a written question a number of months ago asking for a list of all the safe and legal routes, and it wouldn't even have filled that space. So can we do something about that? The revelations in ITV's documentary The Crossing about 27 Channel deaths last November were utterly heartbreaking, and they were horrifying. Did the Home Secretary discuss with counterparts how best to ensure disputes about precisely where a boat is play a distant second fiddle to actually saving people's lives? And can I end, Mr. Speaker, by just saying how disappointed I am after the Minister distancing himself from the Home Secretary's crass comments on migrants, today to hear him talk about murderers and foreign offenders. We're talking about asylum seekers, and he brings up murderers as if they're one and the same thing, and it's an absolute disgrace because he knows the impact that has not just on asylum seekers but on all migrants.
Well, the Honourable Lady needs to face the facts. We on this side of the House will always behave with decency and compassion because those are our values, but we will not be naive, and we are capable of making the distinction between genuine refugees, genuine asylum seekers who are fleeing persecution and human rights abuses, and Albanian economic migrants coming to this country for all the wrong reasons. We're also perfectly capable of making the distinction between good people who deserve our protection and support and bad people who are foreign national offenders who need to be removed from the United Kingdom as soon as possible. I'm surprised to see her joining in with the opposition who want to close down the very detained centres where we keep those people while we try to get them out of the country. She says that she's disappointed that we're pursuing Rwanda. Well, I think Rwanda is an important part of our efforts to tackle illegal migration because deterrence has to be suffused throughout our entire approach. Everything that we do to create further pull factors to the UK ensures more people cross in perilous ways across the Channel, more pressure is put on our public services, and prevents us from helping those people who genuinely deserve our support, like those people who've come from Ukraine or Afghanistan or Syria on our resettlement schemes. And I'll say it again, as I've said it before, if the SNP wanted to help with this issue, they would address the fact that proportionately, Scotland, and in particular SNP local authorities, take fewer people on those resettlement schemes than any other part of the United Kingdom.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't envy my right honourable friend having to do this UQ, having done a few myself. But I know he'll recognise that it's system-wide reform that's needed of the asylum system. Whilst the deal with France is welcome, it will only make a small part of what needs to be done overall. But a particular point I'd focus on is this issue of notification engagement with local authorities, which seems to have disappeared, as we're aware from the situation in Torbay. Can you reassure me it will now actually be restarted? Because at the very least, a common courtesy is to notify MPs and local authorities, not as find out via third parties.
Minister. Yes, and can I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman for his good service in this role and others previously. He's highly respected and missed by his former colleagues at the Home Office. He's absolutely right to say that we need good engagement with members of Parliament and, crucially, with local authorities, because when we're bringing groups of migrants to a local area, often with complex needs, we need to ensure the local authority is involved in that, can prepare for their arrival and provide good services. One of the issues that has been experienced in recent weeks has been that the sheer number of individuals crossing the Channel has put immense pressure on the Manston facility, and the first duty and priority of me as the minister responsible was and is to ensure that Manston operates legally and decently, and that has meant that we've needed to procure a lot of accommodation relatively quickly, and that's meant that some of those procedures have been weaker than any of us would have wished. I hope we can move forward from that, stabilise the situation and get into a pattern of engaging MPs and local authorities in a manner that they deserve to be respected by.
Thank you, Speaker. Today my committee has launched an inquiry into how and why the Home Office is spending foreign aid to support refugees in this country. Could I ask, has the Minister got a budget or a blank cheque? Has he got owed a specialist within the Home Office making sure this money represents value? And also, does he think it's morally right to be spending money that should be going to the poorest in the world, propping up the Treasury, which other countries are spending their own money to fund refugees in their own countries?
Well, firstly, it's the Home Office's responsibility to ensure the money it's spent is spent wisely and provides taxpayer value. How it's accounted for under overseas development aid or otherwise is a matter for the Treasury and not for me and my officials. But the point that really is at the heart of this is that we need to ensure that we stop people crossing the Channel illegally. We don't want to be spending billions of pounds addressing this issue. The opposition, I think, does, because they oppose every single measure we take to try to address it. We want to get people out of hotels, and we would like to move to a system which is based on resettlement schemes like the Ukraine scheme, like the Syria scheme, like the Syria scheme, whereby we choose people at source, they come to the UK, we're able to prioritise our resources on them, and we don't waste, frankly, hundreds of millions of pounds managing a problem of economic migrants who should not be in the UK.
Ben Bradley.
Speaker, this weekend a new migrant hotel was set up in my constituency. I was contacted on Sunday and told that it would be happening, future tense. I subsequently found out that it actually happened already on Saturday. And as yet, it's now Wednesday. We still have no details as to who, how long, what is in place around that facility. On Monday morning, several local people presented themselves as homeless, having been kicked out of that same hotel, which was previously used by the local authority as temporary accommodation. My right honourable friend must surely agree that this is wrong and untenable, and it will cause a huge amount of anger locally. The government needs to stop this, he knows that. But can he at the very least ensure that after this urgent question he's able to investigate in his department and ensure that local stakeholders and councils are able to get the information we need urgently to be able to put the support in place that we need to on a local level?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I believe my officials have already reached out to his council to provide them with further information. As I said earlier, this is not the situation that any of us would want to be in. It's the product of record numbers of people crossing the Channel and of a failure to plan in the months prior to this sudden surge. What we need to do now is move forwards, ensure that Manston is operating legally and correctly as our first duty, and then ensure that any further accommodation is procured in a sensible way, which is simple, decent accommodation, not luxurious hotels, and we ensure that we have proper communication with local authorities. That is my objective, and I'm very happy to work with him to achieve it.
Sammy Wilson.
Unlike some of those who are criticising the government today, we have supported most of the measures which the government has brought forward in the past, though we do understand that there are genuine asylum seekers who do need help. In my own constituency just last weekend, I met many from Ukraine who are grateful for what this country has done for them. Though the ministers almost every year come with a new plan to deal with this problem, and yet the problem gets worse all the time. The numbers are increasing and the frustration is increasing as well. Would the Minister not agree with me that one of the ways of stopping people coming the route the dangerous route they're coming at present, giving revenue to criminal gangs and stopping priority being dealt with for real asylum seekers would be to ensure that those who enter this country illegally are not allowed to apply for asylum in the first place.
Yeah. Well, the honourable gentleman makes a very important point there, and we have already taken action through the Nationality and Borders Act, but my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and I are reviewing our legal framework to ensure that it meets the scale of the challenge that we're currently facing, and if we conclude that further steps are necessary, he can be assured that we will take them and will do so urgently. I think he makes a very strong and compelling case that there should not be a route to a life in the UK if you choose to come here illegally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I strongly support the Minister in what he said by highlighting that the parties opposite, most of them, certainly the Labour Party and the SNP, have zero credibility coming to this House, questioning the Minister when they vote against or vote down and criticise absolutely every legal measure that we bring in to tackle this problem that all of our constituents care deeply about. Now, the Minister would like to know what my constituents are asking me, I'm sure. What they want to know is why can we not turn back those small boats, those dinghies, when they are in the Channel? Now, of course, we all understand that we have obligations to save lives at sea, but surely that doesn't extend to those people who are seeking to undermine our generous hospitality and our asylum system, which is there for those genuine refugees. Please, can he change the law to do that?
Yeah. Well, the Honourable Lady makes a very important point, and she speaks for the British public, millions of whom ask exactly the same question. We are pursuing returns agreements with safe countries and have secured one in the last 12 months with Albania, and 1,000 Albanians have already been removed under that agreement. Clearly, I would like that to be significantly higher, and we're reviewing what further steps we could take there. We would like to secure a returns agreement with France. The agreement that we've reached this week is a good first step, but the Home Secretary will be meeting with other Northern European interior ministers through the Calais group shortly to discuss what the next steps might be. And my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is prioritising this and the broader relationship with France, as we can see in the positive conversations that he's had thus far. And if it is possible to take this agreement further, we will certainly try to.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, as part of Parliament Week, I spoke to a group of 100 asylum seekers and refugees learning English at Hammersmith and Fulham College. Some had been in local budget hotel rooms with their families for a year and a half, with no Home Office interview since they arrived. All willing and able to work, but prevented from doing so. Does the Minister realise that this, along with indefinite detention, is a failed policy that's not only cruel and inhumane, but is hugely wasteful of public money?
Well, on the subject of indefinite detention, I respectfully disagree. I think there's an important role for detaining individuals, particularly foreign national offenders, whilst they're here in the UK and until we can remove them from our shores. And if we had further capacity, we may well detain more people, frankly. But on the point of whether migrants whose asylum claims are being processed should be able to work, there are arguments on both sides, and I know that opinion differs on both sides of this House. On balance, I take the view that it isn't wise to enable asylum seekers to work, because there are already significant pull factors to the UK as a result of the relative ease of working here, access to public services, the fact that we have relatively high approval rates for asylum seekers, and I'm not persuaded it would be wise to add a further pull factor to that mix.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to thank my right honourable friend for what he is saying and doing on this vital subject. But I shall be here all of next week, ready to vote for whatever legislative changes are necessary to protect people who need asylum and to defend our country from people who deliberately and willfully break our laws. So please would he apply the toe of his shoe to the bottoms of the people who need to draft the legislation that we can all support.
Well, I'm grateful for that, and I will take that back to my officials in the department. He can be assured that the Home Secretary and I are doing everything we can, and if there are further legislative changes that we can make, in the spirit of what he's just said, that individuals who come here from safe countries looking for a better life, but not for the safety from persecution, human rights abuses and war that asylum was designed to support, we will make those changes and we'll secure the borders as a result.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've already heard, on the 24th of November last year, at least 27 people drowned while attempting to cross the Channel in a dinghy, including a little girl. 5 are missing and only 2 survived. A documentary shown on ITV on Monday night called The Crossing presented evidence that the tragedy happened in UK waters, notwithstanding multiple distress calls from the people in the dinghy, and while the French and UK coastguards passed the buck over a period of many crucial hours. I understand that solicitors acting for the families of some of the deceased and one of the survivors passed evidence to this effect to the British government in March of this year. The normal political response to a loss of life on this scale would be the prompt announcement of an independent public inquiry. Can the Minister tell me what it is about the people who drowned that means that no public independent inquiry has been announced into the circumstances of their drowning?
Well, the events of a year ago were very shocking, deeply tragic, and my sympathies go out to those individuals' families and friends. As a result of that incident, I can assure her that very significant further steps have been taken by British authorities to enable those crossing the Channel in dangerous crafts to be helped to shore in the UK, to the point that I think 98% of boats that attempt the crossing and pass the median line are then helped to shore either by Border Force, RNLI or the Royal Navy. I pay tribute to those British authorities who do that hard work. I've met them. It is difficult work and they do it superbly. We will not be able to secure the passage of everyone who chooses to get in an unsafe dinghy at the behest of people traffickers and cross the Channel. The best advice, of course, is do not make that dangerous passage. It is illegal and it is extremely perilous. That is the key thing. We should not be encouraging people to make that crossing in the first place. We cannot assure safe passage to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Stoke-on-Trent, decades ago, voluntarily entered the asylum dispersal scheme. But enough is enough. We have done our bit for this country to protect some of the vulnerable people and illegal economic migrants coming to this country via safe countries like France. I am sick to the back teeth of having hotels being used in our great city, being dumped on by Serco because we voluntarily entered that scheme. The local authorities are against it, the police are against it, all 3 Stoke MPs are against it, and for good reason. We have Islamic extremists like Hezbollah Tahrir round the corner from the hotel operating. We have the far right in our city looking to recruit. We have public anger and outrage at the fact that their local services are being depleted whilst they're having to see them be reinforced elsewhere. When is the Minister going to tell Serco Stoke-on-Trent's done its bit and to no more use it? And if he won't, why won't he?
Well, we have taken further steps in the short tenure that I've been in the department, and indeed my right honourable friend has been Home Secretary, to provide fairer distribution of migrants across the country. My right honourable friend ensured there was mandatory dispersal of children, so that all local authorities can play a part in ensuring that those children are in safe accommodation, whether that be children's homes or state or private foster carers accommodation. We're also attempting to procure accommodation in a much broader range of local authorities than has been seen in the past. Historically, the issue was centred on cities, including Stoke-on-Trent, We are now seeking to procure accommodation more broadly in smaller cities, towns, and indeed in some cases in rural areas. That does mean, I'm afraid, as long as numbers are so high, that more parts of the country experience this issue, but it does ensure greater fairness as to how a country we tackle it.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it true that the Home Secretary disagreed with the former Prime Minister, the member for South West Norfolk's ideas on extending the seasonal agricultural workers scheme to help provide extra important temporary migrant labour for our farming sector?
I'm not aware of any such disagreement.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. According to the Home Office's own figures, the 116 asylum seekers that arrived in Warrington last week can expect to spend around 400 days waiting for their cases to be dealt with. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to speed up this process so that those who do not meet the test for asylum can be returned to the safe countries from which they came?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman raised a very important point. Productivity within the Home Office fell very sharply during the COVID period and has yet to recover in its entirety. That's wrong, and we need to change that. We need to ensure that caseworkers are reviewing and deciding cases in at least the same speed as they were just a couple of years ago. A pilot as to how to do this has been held in Leeds, which has more than doubled the productivity of the caseworkers. We want to get it higher than that still and to roll it out across the country, and the Home Secretary and I will be saying more shortly.
Andy McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As legislation rightly progresses to address the shameful sacking of UK seafarers by P&O, another injustice is arising through the actions of the Home Office. The extension of the Offshore Wind Workers Immigration Rules Concession 2017 is seeing UK seafarers replaced by cheap Filipino crew. This is happening in an inshore wind field 15 kilometres from the coast of Fife, a field operated by the state companies of France and Ireland, where contracts have largely gone abroad and where the jobs are now going south. Given this is a statement on migration, why is the Minister allowing this to happen and seeing UK crew who require that employment have been working hard, now replaced by cheap labour that's frankly being exploited and brought in by unsavoury contractors?
We're not allowing that to happen. The Nationality and Borders Act led to a short extension in the practice until April 2023, at which point it comes to a close. And so the valid criticisms of the Honourable Gentleman will be put into effect very shortly.
John Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, we all agree that putting asylum seekers in hotels is not really a great policy, and therefore we need to process their applications as quickly as possible. Would it be possible for each hotel to be given a time frame for the processing of their applications? Because that would then give confidence to the local community that the hotel would be returned to its normal activity sooner rather than later, and it might also incentivise the Home Office staff to improve their productivity.
Well, I'll take that suggestion back to the Home Office, but of course it's our objective to ensure that we process the claims as quickly as possible. A great deal of work is now going on within the Home Office to achieve that and to bring productivity back to where it should always have been, frankly. We want to bring the hotels to a close as quickly as possible. We've already set out some of the steps that we'll be taking to achieve that, such as considering larger sites, such as dispersing individuals in local authority accommodation in the private rental sector elsewhere in the country. But the real task is to prevent people crossing the Channel in the first place, because we cannot build our way out of this issue. We've got to reduce the numbers making the crossings.
Rachel Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. York is wanting to do all it can to support people seeking asylum. However, through providing initial accommodation as opposed to contingency accommodation, it's not receiving the funding that it vitally needs. So when will the government bring forward parity in the funding which local authorities need to be able to support people seeking asylum, and when will the government bring forward a Homes for Refugees scheme so we can ensure that people are settled in our community and getting the support they need from families?
Well, I'd happily speak with the Honourable Lady separately about the specific concerns of York City Council, the hotel accommodation is fully funded by the Home Office, but I appreciate that there are knock-on costs for local authorities, and in fact I met with London councils earlier today, and were it not for this urgent question, I would have been meeting with representatives of local councils from across the country to hear their concerns and see how we can improve the situation.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with regards to the addressing the illegal crossings coming over, can I ask the Minister this specific question? He said the new initiative was cost around £72 million. In 2019, when I was in the Home Affairs Select Committee, we were told there was the Joint Coordination Centre with France, which would help address the issue of individuals illegally crossing. Can I ask the Minister this? Did that system work? How much did it cost? And how will this new system work? Because my constituents in Kent are at the forefront, of the illegal crossings, and we're consistently told by government we're going to take tough, firm, decisive action, but we have seen the numbers increase instead. How will this new system work better than the previous system?
Well, I don't want to overstate the value of this agreement. I think it's an important step forwards, and it might presage further agreements with France in the months or years to come. But it does contain at least two important steps. One is a 40% increase in the number of French personnel on the beaches of northern France, intercepting crafts as they're about to enter the water and making arrests. The current number of French officers on the beaches intercept around 40% of the craft. So if we can increase that by 40% again, you can see that that will lead to a significant reduction. And then the joint centre that we will be establishing with our French counterparts will ensure that the very sophisticated intelligence that the British security services are now drawing up as to what's happening in northern France can be delivered in real time to their counterparts.
Samuel Roberts.
Home Office, of course, is spending millions on the Rwanda scheme, on the new border scheme with France, and hotel bills. But I'm told by a council with a hotel in their area that they have yet to receive any money from the Home Office. And the serious concerns have been expressed by the Children's Commissioner of Wales as regarding the welfare of migrant children in hotels. How is the Home Office working with Welsh Government, Welsh local authorities and Welsh health trusts to ensure that these services are fully funded? And how is the welfare of migrant children in Wales being monitored?
Well, were it not for this urgent question, I would have been meeting with representatives from Welsh local authorities, including the Welsh Local Government Association. I will reschedule that as soon as possible. One of the aims of that is to ensure we have the best possible engagement with those local authorities, and we support them in the broader needs of these individuals, including health and education.
Mr. Speaker, senior police officers in my constituency tell me that the majority of serious organised crime and the drugs trade in Blackpool is now orchestrated by Albanian gangs. Does the Minister recognise that some of those crossing in small boats who then subsequently abscond when they arrive this country are playing a part in fuelling a crime epidemic in towns such as Blackpool?
Well, the evidence presented to us by the security services, such as the NCA, does show that there is a significant and concerning link between Albanian migrants coming to the UK and criminality. And anecdotally, the honourable gentleman and others have raised those issues with me. We do screen all migrants when they arrive illegally at Dover, and we have counter-terrorism officers and others there to ensure that we catch as many individuals as possible. But I'm afraid there is a serious problem here, and that's why we need to take the most robust action we can and remove economic migrants from Albania as swiftly as possible.
Can you inform the House whether the British government have found an airline willing to facilitate its Rwanda policy? Privileged Style have joined two other airlines, Titan Airways and Air Tanker, in stating they won't participate in deportation flights. Isn't it the reality that commercial operators are turning their backs on the government's immoral policy?
Well, I don't believe that the Rwanda policy is immoral. I don't think there's anything ethical about allowing individuals to cross illegally in the Channel, risking their lives and those of their children. We want to create a system that is suffused with deterrence so that people don't make the crossing in the first place, and if they want to claim asylum, do so in the first safe country that they enter. France, of course, is a perfect choice.
Michael Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When
our own citizens, never mind visitors, come to this country, they dutifully form a queue and present their passport at border control. Does the Minister not agree that it forms a complete and utter mockery of our border control systems when people can arrive illegally, thereby committing a crime, and they are then put up in hotels across the country, fed, watered, and don't have to pay energy bills for 400 days, I actually know for years and years? When will we implement the Rwanda plan? When will we push back? When will we return them to France directly? Because deterrence will be the main thing that stops the crossing in the first place.
Well, I totally agree with the honourable gentleman. Deterrence must be the test to which we hold all of aspects of our immigration policy. We will implement the Rwanda plan as soon as it has passed through the courts, and I think that will make a significant impact in deterring people from making this dangerous crossing.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend share my grave concerns at radio chatter recorded by one of my South Thanet constituents just this week, which records a high level of cooperation between the French Navy and UK Border Force as the French Navy escorts migrants through French waters to then be picked up on our side of the median line? Now, the new French deal, which is trying to stop beach launchings, welcome as it is, does it include a requirement for the French Navy to stop and pick up migrant dinghies while still in French waters?
Well, we don't support the chaperoning of crafts to the median line, whereby they would be picked up by British vessels and brought to Ramsgate or Dover or other British ports. That ultimately is counterproductive. It creates yet another pull factor to the UK. These are exactly the sorts of things that closer cooperation with France should be able to enable us to resolve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. EU nations are safe. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that eligible asylum seekers should claim asylum in the first safe country in which they arrive, their first foot down on safe soil? When will we be able to spend Home Office funding on fighting crime and supporting our police rather than dealing with illegal trafficking into this country?
Well, if there are further legislative changes that we need to make, then she can be assured that we will do so. I'd be grateful for her support, and the Home Secretary and I are looking at the most robust measures possible to tackle this issue.
Risto. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Peterborough is a caring city and supports more asylum seekers than any other town or city in the east of England. In the past week, 2 hotels have been stood up to accommodate single men who have crossed the Channel in small boats. One in particular, the Great Northern Hotel, is most inappropriate. Will the Minister outline the criteria by which the Home Office will award longer-term contracts for hotel accommodation? And will he listen to me, my local council, the local police and local health support services and local refugee charities about why the Great Northern Hotel in particular is so inappropriate?
Well, I know that, like many colleagues across the House, the honourable gentleman has been campaigning vociferously on this issue, and he's deeply concerned. We want to ensure that we can move as quickly as possible and as quickly as it's legally possible to a system where we apply sensible, commonsensical criteria, including ensuring that prominent business hotels, such as the Great Northern, are not chosen to house asylum seekers, and instead we're choosing ones which provide decent but good value for money accommodation in appropriate places.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As if the acquisition of the Best Western Hotel in Buckingham costing hotel staff their jobs and putting an unacceptable pressure on local services wasn't bad enough, Buckinghamshire Council learned third-hand from a London borough just this morning that an asylum seeker who is under investigation for a very serious offence was transferred to the asylum hotel in Buckingham by the Metropolitan Police, but was not escorted into the premises and has since gone missing. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that that process is wholly unacceptable, that the lines of communication of my council learning from a London borough rather than from the Home Office or the police was unacceptable, and give a commitment that everything possible is being done to apprehend that individual and ensure that until that investigation is completed, they are in secured accommodation.
Well, that does sound like a very concerning incident, and he has my assurance that I'll raise that with the Home Office and indeed with the police, and we'll report back to him.
Giles Walkley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 23rd of September, I was crossing the Channel quite legally, and I spotted the French warship Athos behaving very strangely, and here I have a screenshot which I took on a navigational device of this warship. It was circling a small open boat full of people. It made no attempt to pick these people up as it should, and as a yachtsman I can tell you these people were in danger. They should have been taken off, but it was rather escorting, as my honourable friend said, that boat to our shores. Now, I'm pleased with the deal that the Home Secretary made, and it is a good first step, as my right honourable friend said. But in my view, it doesn't go far enough. Should we not push to get British boots on the ground and on the beaches alongside their French counterparts in joint operations to keep people on the shores of France, on the shores of the continent?
Well, the honourable gentleman makes an important point. Of course we would like to have an effective returns agreement with France, and we would like to have British officers supporting their French counterparts in northern France. Those issues remain for discussion with France, but it is an important first step that we now have our officers working with their French counterparts in the control centre, so that the very sophisticated intelligence that we are now gathering is being shared in real time and acted upon by the French.
Yesterday, the National Crime Agency confirmed that Albanian organised crime gangs are ferrying thousands of young men to illegally enter this country so that they can set up, take over, run cannabis farms across the country. On arrival, they claim asylum, and then the Home Office transports this criminality to communities up and down the country to infiltrate the local crime scene. One such is Kettering, where there is a quite disgraceful proposal to house up to 150 potential Albanian single males in a 50-room hotel with no kitchen facilities, right slap bang in the middle of Kettering town centre. It is the biggest nighttime economy in Northamptonshire. It's near a family park. These young men will be milling around, getting into all sorts of trouble. I can't think of a worse location for asylum hostel. Will the Immigration Minister meet with me urgently so that I can explain to him why this proposal should not go ahead? Because from where I'm sitting at this present time, His Majesty's Government is neither protecting our shores nor protecting my local community from an increase in imported crime.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises some very important concerns, and I'd be more than happy to meet with him. He and I have already spoken, but a formal meeting would be an obvious next step.
Mr. Speaker, where communities like Ilfracombe in my North Devon patch are dependent on their tourism economy, what steps is his department taking to support these economies which are being damaged every single day? These hotels are not welcoming their normal visitors, and what more will be done to expedite returning tourist hotels to their community?
Well, we want to ensure that we exit the hotels as quickly as possible, and in doing so, wherever we can, we will do that in a prioritised fashion so that where they are particularly unsuitable, where there are particular harms to the local economy, such as to tourist hotspots, those should be top of the list as we exit the hotels and move to a more sustainable future.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents are angry and frustrated about the present situation and have genuine concerns about the possibility that a local hotel might suddenly be found for accommodation for asylum seekers. But, Mr. Speaker, I also see the other side of the coin. In my role as the Prime Minister's trade envoy to the Western Balkans, I actually meet many Albanians who are here illegally, who are working in our health service and other public services. but they are being targeted by unruly elements in our society. So there are losers on all sides, Mr. Speaker. None of them, whether they're the Albanians or my constituents, can understand why the government cannot get to grips with this and process the applications in a seemly manner and on time. What additional resources are being put into ensuring that that takes place?
Well, we have put further staff into the processing centres. There will shortly be 1,500 decision makers working through the claims. And as I said in answer to earlier questions, we're determined to ensure we get back to sensible levels of productivity so we can bust the backlog. But that isn't the sole problem here. Ensuring swift approvals of applications will only create a further pull factor to the UK. So we've got to take other action as well.
Mr. Speaker, both myself and a number of colleagues studied the Australian approach to dealing with illegal immigration. It's often derided by those who would say it wasn't successful. It was successful. We met with a number of officials to see this. It's why we welcomed the Rwanda scheme. Will my right honourable friend give us some sense of timescale when it comes to the Rwanda plan, and also a reassurance that he is engaging with Australian officials? Because they had a huge problem with illegal immigration in Australia. They embraced offshore processing. They now no longer have a huge problem. It's very clear, Mr. Speaker, what works and what doesn't.
Well, we are determined to bring into force the Rwanda proposal as soon as possible. Unfortunately, it is currently being heard by the British courts, but we're optimistic that our case will be successful, and once it is, we'll of course bring into effect those proposals as quickly as we can for all the reasons that my honourable friend sets out, to ensure there's a proper deterrence factor for those making an illegal crossing. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, as I suspect that's the last question, can I thank you for the work that we have done together, because I know you also have been very concerned about hotel accommodation in Chorley, and my officials are in conversation with your local authority, and hopefully we can bring that to a better position as soon as possible.
We now come to the next urgent question. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Foreign Secretary to update the House on the current situation in Iran and the treatment of protesters.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The news on Sunday that the Iranian regime had sentenced a protester to death was tragic. It's an act the UK government utterly condemns in the strongest possible terms. Sadly, this is yet another act of desperation by a regime that clearly cares more about its own survival than the human rights of its own citizens. This is not the first time that we've seen the Iranian regime use barbaric methods to clamp down on those standing up for basic freedoms. As we saw in the 2019 fuel protests, over 300 people were tragically killed. The latest violence levelled at protesters has been utterly appalling. We've seen over 14,000 people detained so far, over 300 deaths, of which 43 were children. The UK opposes the death penalty in all circumstances. It's all the more abhorrent when those sentenced have been arrested while standing up for their rights. My fear, which I'm sure my honourable friend shares, is that the frequency of these death sentences is only likely to increase as the regime processes the thousands of arrests that have been made during the protests. The Iranian judicial system is notorious for its lack of transparency and process, and this barbarism is just one of many threatening and intimidating techniques that the regime has rolled out in response to the protests. The repeated targeting of journalists and systematic constraining of media freedom in Iran, which I know is important to the honourable member opposite, including through restricting internet use, are yet another sign of the regime's weakness in the face of grassroots protesters. These threats have extended to journalists residing in the United Kingdom. On Friday, the Foreign Secretary summoned Iran's most senior representative in the UK to the Foreign Office to make clear this would not be tolerated, and the UK will always stand up to threats from other countries. On Monday, we announced a second round of human rights sanctions against 24 Iranian security officials for their part in the violent crackdown of protesters. This is on top of the sanctions we did last month on the morality police and over 7 other individuals, and we continue to keep our sanctions list under review. The government is also driving efforts in multilateral fora to hold Iran to account. We firmly support a special session of the Human Rights Council, which will press to mandate a UN investigation into protests. We're working closely with the US and other international partners to remove Iran from the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. What we are seeing in Iran is a grassroots movement from the people of Iran who are showing outstanding bravery in the face of a brutal crackdown. Iran needs to stop trying to blame this on everyone but themselves and take responsibility for their actions and instigate real change. It's what the Iranian people have been calling for bravely, and so rightly they deserve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for presiding over it. Can I thank my honourable friend for his statement? But the House should be aware, since the murder of Mahsa Amini, over the last 6 to 7 weeks, there have been nationwide protests in Iran. And contrary to the reports that he gave, the reports I have are that more than 60,000 people have been arrested. These are men, women and children just protesting about the murder of one young lady. Those individuals who've been arrested have been tortured, they've been denied legal representation, they've been denied medication, and in most cases denied bail as well. When bail was first introduced, they were demanding huge sums of money from families that simply didn't have the money. Now, the president of Iran, President Raisi, we should remember, he was responsible as the prosecutor in Iran for 30,000 executions in 1988 of political prisoners. So the direction from the top is very clear. As my honourable friend has mentioned, journalists in the UK have been threatened, and indeed the Foreign Secretary called in the Charge d'Affaires on Friday about those threats. We are aware as well that sentencing and executions are beginning in Iran, and many thousands of people may end up being executed. So, a series of questions for my honourable friend. What representations have been made to Iran directly on the treatment of protesters? What action has been taken at the United Nations to remove Iran from positions of responsibility? He mentions one position, but there are many others that Iran actually shares. The IRGC are directly implemented in the torture of individuals in Iran. What more do we have to see before the IRGC in its entirety is a prescribed organisation in this country? Equally, President Macron has made clear that progress on the JCPOA negotiations is impossible during these positions in Iran. So does my honourable friend agree with me that actually making any progress on the so-called nuclear deal with Iran is impossible under these circumstances? And will he join with me in wishing the England team every success in beating Iran on Monday?
I thank my honourable friend for his very insightful comments, as always, on this vitally important issue. I will join him in wishing every success to the home nations, both England and Wales, of course, in all their matches. And we always want to keep sport with sport and foreign policy separately, because our concerns are not with the Iranian people, who we absolutely support. Our concerns are with the Iranian regime, which my honourable friend and many others here have consistently called out quite rightly, and I join in that sentiment and in that call. My honourable friend has made a number of important points. I just want to reiterate we're utterly appalled by the detention of, we calculate and understand, about 14,000 people. He's come up to a much bigger number. Whichever number it is, they've been most often held without due process, and that is completely wrong when they are really just protesting very courageously for basic human rights. He talks about the freedom of journalists, and quite rightly the Foreign Secretary made sure that the Iranian Chargé understood that we won't tolerate threats to journalists based in the UK. But we're also calling out and condemning the persecution of BBC Persian staff as well, and will continue to do so. He makes an important point about where things stand with the JCPOA, And quite understandably, the situation that we find ourselves in now with Iran's recent actions has made progress even more difficult. But I can assure him we're considering next steps very actively with our international partners. My honourable friend also asked about the IRGC. He is a dog on a bone on this subject, because I know it means so much to him. And all I can say is that, as I've explained to him before in the chamber, we're very concerned about the IRGC's destabilising activity. But the list of prescribed organisations is kept under constant review, but we do not routinely comment on whether an organisation is or is not under consideration or prescription. And I think the last point he raised was about the United Nations. We are obviously pressing, as I said in my earlier remarks, for support of a special session of the UN Human Rights Council, pressing for a UN investigation. And I know from FCDO oral questions there was concern about Iran's presence on the UN Commission on the Status of Women, and we have joined the US very forcefully to seek them to be removed from that. So I hope he understands, honourable members understand, we're absolutely committed in the task of calling out this action and taking the required action that we can at this stage.
Shadow Minister Bambo Charlambu.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you also to the member for Harrow East for posing this very important, urgent question. Iranians have been protesting in almost every town and city for several months, and these protests, led by women and girls, are demanding in a loud and clear voice the end to brutal repression under the Islamic Republic. Iranians are calling for human rights, for an end to state violence, and to live free from the Islamic Republic's dictates on what women should wear and how they choose to live their lives. This is a movement that is going from strength to strength, but the regime's crackdown has been brutal. Over 15,000 people have been detained. 227 Iranian parliamentarians have supported calls for detainees to face harsh punishment or the death penalty, as we would describe it. Only 63 voted against, and 2 brave protesters have now been sentenced to death. Human rights organisations have grave concerns about the fate of many more. The UK must stand unequivocally against the death penalty, which is a gross abuse of human rights. The vote by the Iranian Parliament represents an escalation in brutality of the response to those protests. At home, the Met Police have warned about threats described as imminent credible risk to life against British Iranian journalists. The UK must act to ensure the safety of journalists whose work is vital to the success of protesters in Iran. And so I ask the Minister, in response to this escalation, can he please tell the House what further sanctions will now be put in place on those linked to the regime? And can the Minister tell me what steps the government is taking to protect journalists and UK nationals critical of the regime? And I acknowledge the steps taken with the UN, but what other diplomatic steps is the government taking to garner international opposition to the violence and human rights attacks by the Iranian regime on its own citizens?
I thank the honourable member for his questions. As always, thoughtful. I know he covers these issues with great thoroughness, and he asks very relevant questions. He asks and makes the point that these protests are absolutely grassroots in nature, and that's why it's so important that Iran doesn't try to confuse this with international interaction. That's far from it. These are grassroots, and that's why we stand by the Iranian people. We absolutely condemn the use of the death penalty, particularly in these circumstances, and we continue to call that out in our interactions with the Iranian regime. We, as I've already said, have taken steps to seek protections for journalists and also for those on the ground in Iran with BBC Persian. And in terms of the sanctions, they are under constant review. As I said earlier on, we've already taken further steps with 24 officials in light of these horrific repressive activities by the Iranian regime. That took place on Monday. They'll be under constant review. And as far as the UN, we're working with other international partners on the basis I've already talked about. But we'll work to broaden out those coalitions and drive for action.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Madam Deputy Speaker, what we're seeing is further savage behaviour from a toxic regime against its own people, and the sparse coverage in our own media is a cause for some disquiet at a time when politicians, the media and civic society should be united in giving moral support to the Iranian people as they try to seek basic human rights. But it's not just abuses. In Iran itself, we know that Iran has been sending drones to Russia to oppress the people of Ukraine. We know that Iran Air was used to transport those drones from Tehran to Russia. Why, as I've asked before, is Iran Air an organ of the Iranian state still operating daily flights out of Heathrow rather than being banned?
I'm grateful for the contribution from my right honourable friend. He is a strong advocate on these matters. I just want to reassure him that we have taken urgent steps in response to Iranian activity in support of the Russian military action in Ukraine. We've already put sanctions in place. The point he makes about the airlines I will take away and also speak to Lord Ahmed, who covers these matters from a policy perspective and also raise them with the Foreign Secretary.
SNP spokesman, Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd warmly commend the member for Harrow East for bringing this forward. He's a long-standing advocate for these issues. And the Minister I'd commend on a very measured response to an almost impossible situation. The SNP, along with colleagues, I'm sure, stands foursquare with the brave protesters of Iraq, particularly that they're being led by women and girls against an oppressive, despotic regime. We've seen 500 or so people killed already. We've seen 2 people formally executed that we know of, and thousands, if not tens of thousands, at risk of execution in Iranian jails, which are known for their opacity and lack of judicial standards. So the SNP will support the Minister in supporting the protesters and working towards that. But 3 concrete questions. Firstly, on BBC World Service funding. Surely now is not the time to be cutting funding, it's the time to be building it up. I'd be really glad for an assurance, and I appreciate we've got a statement tomorrow, but surely this is a case that really is open and close. Secondly, on asylum rules. There's only so much we can do within Iran against this regime, but will the UK offer safe haven to those fleeing damage and persecution? And on the JCPOA, I appreciate he's mentioned already, and I would always urge dialogue, however difficult. But I find it more and more difficult to promote dialogue on the JCPOA with this regime at this time. Does he think it's finished? And if so, what are we going to replace it with?
Hear, hear.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's good to see cross-party support on these issues, and we're very grateful for that. It sends out a very clear message from across the United Kingdom. On the Honourable Member's point about the BBC World Service, and obviously that's going to be important. It's got an independent editorial and operational approach, but we are actively supporting them with the funding for disinformation and so forth. And all I would just say is there has been some misreporting, I think, about the radio content when most people are moving to digital. There's a digital first process there when most of the people who listen to BBC Persian are normally by TV or online. So we're working on that particular dimension. He also raised points, I think, on sanctions, which we continue to monitor and push forward on, and I'll gladly meet with him after this urgent question to discuss the other issues too.
Vicky Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there are reports that the Iranian authorities are using live ammunition to shoot at teenage girls. There are stories of young women being arrested, forced into marriage and raped. These are children who just want the most basic of rights. So it's good to hear from the Minister that the UK is working to remove Iran from the UN Commission on Status of Women. But can he confirm categorically to the women and girls of Iran who may be listening to this that we will always stand on the side of them against oppression, and that we will not stop until we have used every single tool in our diplomatic and sanctions toolbox?
I thank my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford. She is a terrific advocate for women in her amazing work at FCDO and outside as well. Look, the sad death of Mahsa Amini is just a shocking reminder of the repression faced by women in Iran, and we stand full square with them. As a father of 2 daughters, we have to always be mindful of the rights of women, particularly in a country with a brutal regime like Iran. We will continue to stand full square with them.
Navendu Mishra.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the sanctions against those who commit abuses in Iran are needed. So can the Minister explain what his government is doing to ensure that the burden of the sanction does not fall upon ordinary innocent Iranians?
It's a good question. The focus is on targeting on those people who have perpetrated most heinous acts, but they're constantly under review.
Crispin Blunt.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome my honourable friend's strong statement of British values towards Iran and the strong statement about support for those very brave women and girls who are protesting for their fundamental human rights, and that it is our values and rights that ought to dictate our policy. Could my honourable friend comment on the slightly more difficult contrast that is then made with countries like Egypt, which has 60,000 political prisoners, including Alaa Abdel Fattah, a British Egyptian citizen, about whom the Prime Minister made representations at the recent summit, where we still don't even have a consular access to him, and our policy towards Israel and the composition of its new government, which must give very grave cause for concern, alongside the fact that Israel has now been found guilty of running an apartheid policy by the most distinguished three human rights organisations in the world, as well as being in gross violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I just want to reassure him that human rights is at the front of our conversations and our dialogue and our diplomatic activity, whether it's in Iran or in relation to Egypt, as we already talked about the case of Mr. Al-Fattah, and in our discussions with Israel as well. It's at the forefront of what we're doing, particularly in the Middle East.
Leila Moran.
Deputy Speaker, may I thank the honourable member for bringing this urgent question and add the Liberal Democrat voice to solidarity with the brave Iranian people who deserve so much better than what they are seeing. Can I press the Minister on the idea of giving safe haven to some of these brave protesters? Now, they are patriots in their own country. They clearly want their own country to be a better place. But if they are being locked up and executed, then that is not the way to ensure Iran's stability moving forwards. Surely it would be better to offer them safe haven in this country temporarily so that they can then go back and rebuild. What consideration has the Minister given to a resettlement scheme?
There may well be routes available for those individuals she's raised, and I will certainly bring that to the attention of Lord Ahmed.
David Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been clear for many years that Iran is a rogue state, presided over by gangsters posing as clerics who seek to maintain control through the actions of thugs posing as police officers and militia. It's clear that the regime is terrified of losing that control, which is why they're now resorting to executing their own citizens for confected crimes. So does my honourable friend not agree that now is the time for the United Kingdom to position itself on the right side of history by declaring unequivocally that it supports the demands of the brave people of Iran for regime change in that country? And whilst he, I understand, will not comment on what proscription the government may be considering in the future, could he take it from me that there are very many honourable members who would be delighted if they woke up tomorrow morning to discover that the IRGC had been proscribed today?
I understand the points that my honourable friend makes. The destabilising activity of the IRGC, whether it's in Yemen or Iraq, Lebanon or Syria, very, very concerning in the region and beyond. We're constantly keeping that prescription under review, but obviously, as he knows, I can't comment at this stage.
Steve McCabe.
What measures is the government taking to curb the activities of agents of this regime attempting to operate in this country and elsewhere in Europe? And in particular, what actions are we taking to ensure that Iranians with diplomatic status in this country are genuine diplomats?
I can't comment on the detail, obviously, of these things. I'm sitting next to one of my esteemed colleagues at the Ministry of Defence. All these issues are constantly monitored.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker. There's lots of very grim things happening in the world, but I think many of us will be particularly troubled and disturbed and by what is happening in Iran recently, and my heart goes out to everyone protesting, particularly the women and the girls. I support the views of many of my colleagues, and I do think that the IRGC should be listed as a terrorist organisation. But I'd like to ask my honourable friend, in terms of the Christian community in Iran, just this last Friday I met with somebody who fled Iran, is a Christian, who's now a key part of a local church in Ipswich. What steps the government are taking to support the Christian community in Iran and many people who are fleeing persecution?
That's a very good question. It's a subject I feel very strongly about as well. I note that the Honourable Member for Strangford's in his place. He feels strongly about these issues too. We raise those issues about Christians, but not just Christians, other minorities as well in Iran, which we absolutely need to do.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know that we have Iranian nationals here in the UK with very clear links to the regime. We also know that there are Iranian and Iranian heritage journalists in particular based here in the UK who have been subject to incredibly serious harassment and threats. And there's just been a recent report that there have been up to 10 assassination attempts on British residents this year from MI5. So can I ask him, what is he doing to work with his colleagues across government to make sure that those speaking out against the regime based here in the UK are safe, and that those who are propping up the regime living in the UK know that that is utterly unacceptable?
As I said previously, in response to a very serious issue that's been raised, the Foreign Secretary asked the Chargé d'Affaires to come into to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and was made very clear to them in no uncertain terms that we do not allow or condone any of these activities in terms of intimidation. We're constantly monitoring that situation. We'll call that activity out.
Matthew Offord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Iran's human rights activist news agency has reported that protesters have already been murdered and buried in unmarked graves. This is similar to activities that happened in 1988 with 30,000 people killed then, indeed when President Raisi was also involved with the organisation. But he will also know, as he has listed already, that the IRGC will orchestrate such behaviours, as indeed they did the bomb plot that targeted myself and the Honourable Member for Harrow East. So why we don't want the Minister to comment upon prescription, we simply want him, in the face of overwhelming evidence, to prescribe the IRGC in its entirety.
I thank my honourable friend for raising that issue, and I completely understand, given the circumstances he and other colleagues found themselves in, why this is particularly poignant for them. But it has much wider reach, as he says. And I also note that my honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, is in his place. He's very aware of these issues. He and I have had conversations about this, along with Lord Ahmed.
Afsar Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The women protesters in Iran are bravely protesting for the fundamental freedom to live their lives as they choose. The UK has a responsibility to support them. Can the Minister explain how the UK intends to do this?
Well, as others have said, it's vital that we support these brave Iranian people. It's a grassroots-led protest movement, and as I've highlighted, we've made sure that we are calling out this activity at every opportunity. We've put sanctions in place, and we're taking multilateral activity, one of which I think is very important is working with the US to remove Iran from the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which we've already talked about.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join with my honourable friend for Harrow East and other honourable and right honourable members in reiterating my own call that the government should prescribe the IRGC. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is impossible to separate the Iranian regime's violent repression of its own civilian population from its broader ambitions for regional dominance and to develop a nuclear weapon. Today, the IAEA Board of Governors convenes for an important meeting to discuss Iran's many nuclear transgressions. Can my honourable friend assure me that the UK will be leading efforts to call for a motion of censure in light of Iran's flagrant breaches of the imploding JCPOA nuclear agreement?
Another important point, many dimensions in what's going on in Iran at the moment. But it's clear that Iran's latest actions have made progress on the Iranians' nuclear activity much more difficult. As I've said before, we're considering next steps with our international partners, but it's absolutely vital that Iran cooperates with the IAEA.
Anna McMorrin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over 14,000 protesters have been arrested in Iran since September, and now there is real concern that many of these brave women, journalists, activists, lawyers, educators, are soon to be executed by the regime. I'm grateful to the Minister for his answers to the questions today, but perhaps he could answer how the UK government is going to work with international partners to ensure the safety of these women and ensure they don't face the death sentence.
It's vital, as I've said, to make sure we call this out. I think the fact that we've seen common cause across the chamber today, a common voice in condemning these actions, and particularly not just the repression of these protests, but also the death sentences that have been meted out. We will continue to do that, and particularly in multilateral fora as well, as I've already highlighted. We need to keep putting the pressure on this brutal regime.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know the Minister's been pressed on these issues already today, but I think it's important that he hears the strength of feeling across this House. As the violent enforcer of the Supreme Leader of Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps must be held accountable for its ongoing crimes against the Iranian people. As the principal financier and arms supplier of terror groups across the Middle East, it's also responsible for targeting innocent civilians from Iraq and Israel through to Yemen and the UAE, and has been linked to the deaths of over 100 British military personnel. Does my right honourable friend share my concerns and those of others across this House that the IRGC is likely undertaking activities in the UK, and does he agree that they must be proscribed?
I completely understand why my honourable friend has added his voice to concerns about the activities of the IRGC. We're concerned too. Their activities in country, but also in the region, are incredibly destabilising. And I cannot add anything else to what I've said about the prescription, but we monitor their activities and we'll call it out and confront it.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is right when he says there is universal condemnation across this House, where we've talked powerfully in this session about the human rights abuses and the persecution of the people of Iran, in particular the women fighting for their most basic freedoms. But does he agree with me that if we are to learn the lessons from our suffragette four-sisters about deeds, not words, government needs to join up? Because there are 11,000 Iranians making application for asylum in the UK, and only 98 were granted last year. They are the third highest group of people in the Channel crossing boats. The very same people whose persecution we are now talking about in the previous session, people felt should be penalised. So can he tell us what discussions he's actually had already with his Home Office counterparts about providing sanctuary to those people that we recognise are being persecuted and we do not wish to leave languishing in hotels?
I thank the honourable member for her question. As I've said before, there are routes available, and I'll make sure that her points are raised with Lord Ahmed, who covers this from a policy perspective, and her words will not be lost also with the Foreign Secretary.
Shiomura.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, many constituents had contacted me in support of the brave women and girls and their allies protesting in Iran, and that was before the latest despicable attack on them. The death penalty for claiming basic human rights. Next weekend, I, like many women, will be marching to reclaim the night. The idea that such a protest could attract the death penalty, that oppresses and silences us all. So what will the Minister do to ensure that every protest, every arrest, every act of torture, every threat of death receives global attention? And how does slashing the BBC's Persian radio service contribute to that?
I've already responded to the point about BBC Persian, but in terms of the bravery, we recognise that. We have put sanctions in place to call out those people. And of course, she talks about amplifying that message. And one of the key steps that we're taking is making sure, or working to remove Iran from the UN Commission on the Status of Women. That's a positive step forward in this context.
Margaret Ferrier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in light of the unacceptable response to protests by the Iranian authorities, what are ministers doing to ensure Iran is removed from the UN Commission on the Status of Women, as women have borne the brunt of many of the abuses?
As I said before, we're working with our international partners, working very closely with the United States on that particular and very specific point. She's right, it makes a difference, and we're going to push that forward.
Jim Shellen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his response to the answers and for his desire and determination to assist the protesters in their quest for democracy in Iran. Iranian protesters are calling for a non-religious state where rights of women and religious minorities are protected, an issue that both I and the Minister share. The Tehran Revolutionary Court has stated that sentencing protesters to death on charges including, allegedly, enmity against God and corruption on earth. These charges have a chilling effect on the protesters and the religious minorities and have led to fears of large-scale executions in Iran in the coming weeks. So does the Minister agree with me that as a country we must pursue every available measure to support Iranians asserting their fundamental human rights and sanction officials responsible for these violent crackdowns? Thank you.
Well, my honourable friend always makes these points with conviction and with real passion. I share those views. We want to support the Iranian people in this struggle, and that is women, girls, and of course religious minorities too. We'll take every possible step forward that we can, and with the support cross-party here, we'll have extra weight and clout in making those calls for action.
Thank you. That concludes the proceedings on the urgent question, and we will now proceed to statement from the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I will make a statement about the missile strike in Poland overnight. At approximately 1900 hours local time last night, there were missile explosions in a village in eastern Poland, approximately 4 miles from the border with Ukraine, killing 2 civilians and wounding 4 during an extended Russian bombardment of Ukrainian territory. As soon as I received the report, I contacted my Polish counterpart to express the sympathy and solidarity of the United Kingdom, and I'm sure the whole House will share that sentiment, and also to offer practical support. I then spoke to my right honourable friend in a trilateral call with my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary. Spoke to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in a trilateral call with my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, whilst the Prime Minister was attending the G20 summit in Indonesia. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, immediately called President Duda of Poland to convey the UK's condolences for the tragic loss of civilian life and to assure him of our unwavering support to a steadfast NATO ally. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, then spoke to President Zelensky about the latest situation and also attended an ad hoc meeting of G7 leaders called by President Biden to discuss the evolving situation. This morning I spoke to the Polish Foreign Minister and I commended Poland's decisive, determined but calm, professional response to the situation. I think it is wise to advise the House that at this point the full details of the incident are not complete, but earlier today Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, said there was, and I quote, no indication that this was the result of a deliberate attack. He added that the incident was, and I quote again, likely caused by a Ukrainian air defence missile fired to defend Ukrainian territory against Russian cruise missile attacks. Poland will lead the investigation to establish exactly what has happened, and the UK stands ready to provide any practical or technical assistance. In the meantime, we are not going to rush to judgment. Our response will always be led by the facts. But the House should be in no doubt that the only reason why missiles are flying through European skies and exploding in European villages is because of Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. Secretary General Stoltenberg was absolutely right when he said today that what occurred in Poland is not Ukraine's fault and that Russia bears the ultimate responsibility. Yesterday, Putin launched one of the heaviest attacks since the war began, firing wave upon wave of more than 80 missiles at Ukrainian cities, obliterating homes of ordinary families, destroying critical national infrastructure, and depriving millions of Ukrainians of power and heat just as winter sets in. This brutal air campaign is Putin's revenge for Ukraine's successes on the battlefield, where Russian forces have been expelled from thousands of square miles of territory. And now he is trying to terrorize the people of Ukraine and break their will by leaving them shivering in cold and darkness. I have no doubt he will be unsuccessful in that endeavor. But this is why Britain is helping Ukraine to strengthen its air defences. We have provided over 1,000 surface-to-air missiles thus far, and I know the House will be united in our support for Ukraine's right to defend her territory and her people. On Monday, I signed a memorandum of understanding as part of our £10 million commitment to help the Ukraine rebuild its critical energy infrastructure. The tragic incident in Poland last night is ultimately the result of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. That is the only reason why it has happened, and it would not have happened otherwise. And that is why the UK and our allies stand in solidarity with Poland, and that is why we are determined to support Ukraine until they prevail and their country is once again free. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I commend the statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement, and I'm grateful for the direct communications we had on this matter on Privy Council terms last night. This was a serious incident that led to a tragic loss of life, and I join the whole House in sending condolences to the families of those killed, and I expressed them directly to the Polish ambassador last night. Poland and NATO allies deserve praise for taking the correct steps to carefully assess this incident and avoid escalation. It is right that we continue to proceed with cool heads to determine exactly what has taken place and work in lockstep with Poland and NATO allies. As my right honourable friend, the Shadow Defence Secretary, and I restated on our visits to NATO HQ in Brussels last week, Labour's commitment to NATO is unshakable. We also note, as the Foreign Secretary did too, the NATO General Secretary's words earlier today. Russia bears ultimate responsibility as it continues its illegal war against Ukraine. This incident highlights the sheer recklessness of Putin's war and the ongoing need to guard against miscalculation and deter aggression. Yesterday saw one of the largest barrages of missiles against Ukraine since the war began, cruelly targeting civilian infrastructure as the winter approaches. Ukraine will continue to have our total support and complete solidarity in its brave fight against Russian aggression. It's right that we play our full part in strengthening Ukraine's air defence capacity. And as the world gathers in Bali with an agenda to address common problems, one leader didn't show, instead hiding from scrutiny and condemnation. Putin's warmongering is being met with ever greater isolation. On Monday, the UN General Assembly approved a resolution calling for Russia to be held accountable for invading Ukraine, recognising the need for an international mechanism for reparation for damage, loss or injury caused by Putin's wrongful acts. Labour stands with the international community in demanding that Russia is held accountable. Her actions are bringing death and destruction in Ukraine and economic pain for the whole world. The numbers in the latest UN vote are proof that more needs to be done to build and sustain global opposition to Putin's barbaric war. What strategy has the government put in place to strengthen opposition to the invasion across particularly the global south? The result of this war will depend on who has more endurance, Putin's Russia or Ukraine and its supporters around the world. Labour stands fully committed to work in support of Ukraine until it wins its freedom. That is what must happen. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I find myself in complete agreement with the Shadow Foreign Secretary. It is absolutely right that we stand in solidarity with our allies, our formal allies in NATO, and also with the Ukrainian people as they defend themselves. And he speaks about endurance, and I've spoken in the past about the need for strategic endurance, recognising that we must send the message not just to Vladimir Putin, but to every other potential aggressor around the world, that we will defend the UN Charter, we will defend international humanitarian law, we will defend the right of territorial integrity, and we will defend it until the job is done. And we must maintain the strategic endurance. He is absolutely right to ask about the support to the international coalition which has condemned the Russian actions. 141 countries voted at the UN General Assembly at the start of this conflict. 143 voted in condemnation of the illegal annexation of eastern and southern oblasts in Ukraine. But that coalition needs to be supported. I and the ministers in the department and the officials within the department regularly engage with those countries in the global south who are worried about food security, they are worried about fuel security, and they are worried about the availability of fertiliser. We have worked in conjunction with our international allies, particularly Turkey, to ensure the Black Sea Grain Initiative is supported, and we hope that that will be extended, and we are lobbying for that extension to occur, so that Vladimir Putin cannot use hunger or the fear of hunger as leverage to support his illegal attempted invasion of Ukraine.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's remarks about strategic endurance, and from our point of view that must surely involve the continued supply of munitions which have enabled Ukraine to resist so effectively so far. So can he assure the House that he and the Defence Secretary have made appropriate representations to the Chancellor and the Prime Minister that tomorrow we must not send a signal of weakness in respect of how much we're prepared to invest in defence?
My right honourable friend makes an incredibly important point about the need to send an important message to the world, and indeed an important message to our Ukrainian friends, that we are in it for the long haul. We do have that strategic endurance, and we will support them until the job is done. My right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, and I have discussed this issue on a number of occasions, and indeed we will have high-level representation at the Ramstein donor conference, which is occurring as we speak, to ensure that we listen to the needs of Ukraine, and that both the scale and the nature of our support is coordinated with them so they can defend themselves against the evolving threats that they see from Russia.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd also thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement, and I'd commend him on a very measured tone, a very welcome measured tone in his statement today. For the SNP, I'd also express our total solidarity and our condolences to the people of Poland, and I commend them on their restraint as well overnight. I think a lot of us didn't get much sleep last night as we were contemplating what might be the consequences of this, and if this was a tragic accident, it was a tragic accident, but as the Foreign Secretary rightly says, it's the Ukrainians who are in the front line and have been for many months, and the responsibility that there's rockets flying at all is entirely at the door of Vladimir Putin, and the SNP stands foursquare as part of the global coalition in Ukraine's defence. But sadly, the Kremlin's tactics in Syria surely tell us that this is going to continue. if not get worse. As we see land advances by the Ukrainian forces, we'll see more indiscriminate attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by air. So what assessment has the Foreign Commonwealth Defence Ministries made of the need for further air support, not just for Ukraine but also for neighbouring countries? I appreciate there's been 1,000 or so missiles already given, but what more do we need? And is it now time to be talking about a no-fly zone over Ukraine and neighbouring countries to deter, to the extent we can, further Russian aggression? Thank you.
I would also like to put on record the fact that I recognise that right across the House, including from the SNP benches, we have had a unanimity of voice on the world stage. If Vladimir Putin felt that his aggression in Ukraine could in any way drive wedges between people who are like-minded on these issues, he was wrong, and that is true in this House, and that's true on the international stage, and I thank him for the points that he has made. He does make an incredibly important point about the evolving threat, as I said in my response to the Right Honourable friend from New Forest East. It is clear now that as Russia sees failures on the battlefield, they are moving to attacks from the air. We have provided surface-to-air defence missile systems, AMRAAM air-to-air defence missile systems. We'll be looking at further air defence donations that can come from the international community, and also importantly making sure there is integration in the air defence cover that Ukraine is able to provide. We know what Putin intends to do. As I say, he intends to starve and freeze the Ukrainians into submission, and we have to stand shoulder to shoulder with them in order to prevent him from doing so.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I presume the Foreign Secretary would agree with me that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty is just as relevant now as it's ever been. In other words, an attack against any member of NATO is an attack against any of us. And we should make absolutely clear to Russia that that remains the case.
Secretary of State.
My gallant and honourable friend makes an incredibly important point about the importance of our collective defence. I would remind the House that the NATO Secretary-General's assessment is that this was not a deliberate attack, and so in this instance, Article 5 would not be the most appropriate response. As I say again, I commend the Polish government for the swift, decisive, but calm and measured response to this incident. And I would also say that I had a conversation this morning with our permanent representative at NATO in Brussels. NATO also acted swiftly and calmly by discussing this incident, and the response will be calibrated to the facts on the ground. But as I say, my gallant honourable friend is right that our collective defence is a cornerstone of our safety.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement. We all obviously and correctly totally condemn the Russian invasion, the war against Ukraine and the illegal occupation, as we condemn illegal occupations everywhere else. Possibly more than 200,000 people have already died in this conflict, and with the current trajectory there's going to be tragically many more deaths of Ukrainians and indeed Russian conscripts. There's going to be devastated families all around. I hear everything he says today, but he didn't say anything about the possible role of the United Nations or any other world body to try to bring about a process that can at least halt this conflict, restore the status quo in terms of land areas, and try and bring about an early end to this war. Otherwise, we're going to have hundreds of thousands more dead as a result of what is, of course, totally wrong occupation of Ukraine.
Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would remind the Right Honourable Gentleman that calls for halting the war were not emanating from Moscow when they felt they were on the front foot. They were not calling to halt the war when those tanks were surrounding Kyiv, and they were not calling to halt the war when they thought that President Zelensky's government would collapse. I find it interesting that from certain places calls to halt the war are coming now that Russia is on the back foot, now that Russia is losing territory in the east and the south of Ukraine. The important point to make is that ceasing a conflict is not in itself a neutral act. The Ukrainians have been attacked, murdered, their cities damaged, and their critical national infrastructure put beyond use. It is incredibly important that the message is sent both to President Putin and to other potential aggressors around the world that if you start a conflict like this, you have to be prepared for the consequences, both in terms of the nation defending itself and their friends around the world helping them to do so. Ultimately, of course, we want this war to come to an end, and we would prefer it come to an end quickly, but it has to come to an end on terms that are acceptable to the Ukrainian people, and only the Ukrainian people can decide when that time is.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you. Can I add my voice of condolences to the people of Poland? President Duda is a very thoughtful man, and we should all be deeply thankful for his calm and rational approach in recent hours. Putin is using military missiles to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure. He's doing this because he wants innocent Ukrainians to freeze and starve to death this winter. There can be nothing more evil than that. So can he confirm that we and our allies will continue to provide Ukraine with the support that they need so that they can help take down those missiles before they land?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right in her assessment as to what Vladimir Putin is attempting to do. I'd remind the House that the targeting, the rocket attacks that we saw overnight were targeting locations deep to the west of Ukraine, hundreds of miles away from the line of contact, specifically targeting critical national infrastructure. At the start of this conflict, it was our anti-tank missiles, the NLAW missile systems that helped the Ukrainians defend themselves. Now it is air defence and energy generation that they need, and we will continue to supply them what they need until they prevail in this conflict.
Leila Moran.
Deputy Speaker, swift and measured is absolutely the right call, and can I thank the Minister for the tone of his statement, which I think is spot on. I'm very aware across this House how we've pulled together, how at every moment we have spoken with one voice, and through the Economic Crime Bill 1 and now Economic Crime Bill 2, trying to put as many measures in place to punish Putin and his cronies. But there was one area that was largely missing from Economic Crime Bill 2, and that was the golden visas. We still haven't seen the report from the Home Office. There are amendments down this afternoon to the National Security Bill that the government could just accept, compelling them to publish within 2 weeks. Would the Foreign Secretary look at that? We need to use every sinew of what we have in this House to hold Putin and his cronies to account.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would remind the Honourable Lady that that scheme is closed and has been for some time. Obviously, visas are a matter for the Home Office rather than the Foreign Office. But I would remind her that in a number of instances, people come to this country because they are fleeing persecution in the countries of their birth. And I know for a number of British nationals of Russian heritage, that was very much the case. And I am very, very proud that the UK was one of the first countries to bring in sanctions to specifically target the money people around Vladimir Putin, to choke off the supply of funds which helped him prosecute this conflict, and will continue to work in conjunction and coordination with our international allies to do likewise.
Sir Vernon Jenkins.
Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend for making it so clear that it is irrelevant about whose missile it was, that the state of affairs is the responsibility of the aggressor, Putin's Russia. And to that extent, can he use this incident to amplify to our allies in Europe and to some of our colleagues in the government that Putin's Russia is not just at war in Ukraine, he is at war with us. His hybrid campaign, cyber attacks, assassinations, sabotage of critical national infrastructure in European countries, and of course the energy war is against us. And unless we defeat Russia in this war in Ukraine, it is a defeat for the West, and therefore we must galvanise ourselves and put ourselves on the right footing and in the right frame of mind in order to ensure that the Ukrainian people prevail.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend makes an incredibly important point about the multiple things that are at stake through this conflict. Obviously, what we have seen is military lives lost. We've seen civilian lives lost. Sadly, in ground that has been ceded by the Russian military, we have seen what appears to be evidence of widespread and systematic human rights abuses. These are the things that we're defending against. But also, in addition to that, we're also defending the UN Charter, we're defending the concept of adherence to international law, and we, as he very rightly says, we have been the recipients of cyber attacks. We have been the recipients of attacks on our homeland here in the UK, which we've attributed to Vladimir Putin and the Russian regime. All these things are at stake all at once, and we have to defend ourselves against the full range of threats. And he's absolutely right to highlight that today.